Let's go, let's go, let's go. If you are in the chat right now, welcome to another episode of Ask a Brother Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff St. James. And listen, y'all, I know why y'all are here tonight. So if you are in the chat, make sure you let me know that you're in the building. For starters, make sure that you like this video real quick. Make sure you send it to 2 or 3 people. You know what? Send it to 3, 4, or even 5 people, because I'm telling y'all right now, when this brother comes on, when this guest, listen, let me not get ahead of myself. First off, shout out to all of the subscribers. I looked at and I just checked about 5 minutes ago. We are at 31,487. So shout out to y'all. Shout out to all of you. Shout out to all of you for have been supporting this channel at 31,487 people. I'm realizing, like, wow, 30,000+ people have joined this channel in such a short amount of time. So as you all start to trickle in, y'all that have consistently watched this, y'all know what I'm about to say. Make sure that you like it. Make sure that you share it. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't done so already. And last but not least, make sure that you send it to a few people as well. All right. So for starters, Miss Plum is already hitting the ground running. So if you have not done so, feel free to donate to the channel. It always helps with me being able to buy equipment, being able to travel, being able to do this, because, you know, I'm working and have a 9-to-5 job right now as we speak. But any event that you have $2 or $3, whatever it is that you're able to donate for the super chats, it goes a long way. Best believe I literally have to travel next month and catch a flight. So I have to buy some flight tickets pretty soon for a show out in Atlanta. So if I don't have to pay for this stuff out of pocket, out of my own paycheck, that's the most ideal, so I can continue to show up, do these things. And I'm extremely grateful that you all have been showing love. And the types of guests and people that have been coming through, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. I cannot lie. And thank you to all of you who showed love and joined the interviews that I've been pushing last week and even the week before. Last week we had Leslie Elliott Boyce, we had Mr. Obsidian, and also Tess Pereira. All 3 very different perspectives, and with their own respective disciplines and perspectives. And I just love like how this channel is going and how it and where it's going. So super excited to y'all. Shout out to the members, because the members are the ones who are holding this channel down by them joining as a member. And I believe it's $2.99 to be a monthly member. Just by that alone, we can kind of keep this ship flowing with my editors and people that help behind the scenes. We're able to compensate them, keep them happy. And it's literally because of stuff like that. So shout out to you all for kind of supporting the cause as well. So if there are, as of now, 58 people in the chat, that means I don't think we have 58 likes. So please, if you haven't done so, make sure that you do. When I tell y'all, and I promise y'all again and again and again, that is imperative. It is imperative. When I tell y'all this is something you're not going to want to miss, to the men, to the ladies, to the fellas, send it to your homegirls, send it to your homeboys. Ladies, send it to your man. This is going to be such a great, in my mind, in-depth conversation about what I think is happening in terms of this whole gender war and men and women not being able to understand each other's perspectives. I just think that this is going to be such an incredible, dope experience. But before I get underway with introducing him, one minor announcement, which is our sponsor for today, which is Do Sable Botanical Farms. Shout out to them, because let me just pull this video up real quick. They are the ones that offer healthy alternatives to assist you gentlemen in the bedroom with your sexual performance and improving testosterone levels. So we're going to check out a quick video from Do Sable Botanical Farms. And then after that, just 1 or 2 quick announcements. So again, this is the time before our guest comes in. This is the time, real quick. Run with your phone, text it to your friends, send it to your homegirls, because I'm telling you, this is going to be one of those conversations that I just have a strange feeling. I've mentioned it with Dave Anderson and Obsidian and other people. Each time I'm telling y'all that this is interesting and thought-provoking, I'm usually not wrong. So best believe y'all are not going to want to miss this. So again, we're going to focus first on our sponsor, and then we're going to get underway. Stay tuned. right, y'all. Welcome back. So real quick, if you have not done so, make sure that you check out our store. As you see in the back, we have the Make a Masculinity Great Again hat. We have the same for Make Femininity Great Again hats and sweatshirts and hoodies as well. This stuff is not going to be staying too much longer as we get ready for the holidays, because I'm going to have some holiday colors and themes and different items that are up. So make sure, if you haven't, feel free to check out our merchandise. Leading up until Black Friday, I think we're going to kind of leave it then, and then we're probably going to start swapping out stuff as well. So real quick, men's groups. If you haven't, make sure that you check out our men's group. It is $75 for the month. So per week, we meet on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we've been loving it so far. We're actually currently working through the 12 Rules of Life from Dr. Jordan Peterson. We're currently in chapter 3. And me and the guys were just saying this was one of the best chapters we've read in the book in quite some time, and absolutely loved it. And we're working together as we strive to work on self-improvement. And we were just talking about when we're going to be planning potentially our men's retreat later, some point next year. And there's already potential discussion that it may potentially be in Jamaica. So I will stay tuned for that. But guess what? When I announce it, the first people who are going to is definitely going to be capped. We're not going to allow every single guy to be able to sign up for it. We're going to start with the people who are coming into the group to get first dibs of the seats. And then after that, I'll announce it and post the links. And then once it's filled, it's filled. So the one way to kind of stand out is definitely to make sure that you kind of check out our men's group and see if it's something that potentially can be helpful and beneficial to you as well. All right, y'all. So, and then last but not least, for everybody okay, so last time I made the announcement 3 minutes ago, we were at about 50 people. Now we're at 107 people. So if you're new and you've come in the last 3 minutes, make sure that you like the video. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't done so. Feel free to become a member if you feel free. It's $2.99 to become a member. And most importantly, if you feel free to donate tonight, if you feel like we are cooking in the conversation, if you feel like tonight's next guest is going to be cooking, $2, $3 donations, whatever it is that you could afford, greatly appreciate it. If you do not want to give through YouTube, there's other ways that you can donate. Of course, I believe it's through Cash App, PayPal, and I believe YouTube as well. Those are typically the options, more or less. But listen, y'all, let's get all that stuff out the way, because I know y'all all ain't tuning in for me. I know that there's really a much more important reason, a much more important person that you all are tuning in for. So I am hyped. I am excited nonetheless, and I am absolutely honored for this moment for sure. So without further ado, our next guest is a professor of Africana Studies, a prolific scholar, author, and developer of the concept of Black masculinism. He is one of the key individuals that built the foundation of Black male studies and challenging stereotypes about males and masculinity. While working alongside titans in their profession like BGS, Dennis Sperling, and many others, they have developed one of the most comprehensive political agendas on the behalf of both Black men and men in general in 2024. I will just say this, y'all. If you don't know this brother, you will soon realize there's a reason for why I'm so excited, and why so many people and so many comments over the last few months have said you got to get this brother on. Please help me welcome Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. What's going on, sir?
Appreciate that.
What's going on, good brother? Welcome to the show, man. And for starters, man, I'm honored, genuinely honored for you to come on the platform, show love, and show up, because I know you're a busy guy and there's so much on your plate, man. So just welcome to the spot, bro.
And the honor's mine, man. I appreciate it. And like I said, I enjoy where you're going. I enjoy what your channel is doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it heads from here. So.
Listen, I appreciate this for sure, and I'm super excited. So real quick, y'all, if because I'm going to be focusing so much on our conversation, and a lot of y'all telling me to focus to make sure I'm listening. I'm always listening, but y'all want me to make sure I'm really, really listening. I'm going to keep an eyeball out for the super chat. So the same person that just now, the super chats or the comments, and I'm going to try to prioritize to read in between our conversations. And over time, I may casually see other people's comments, but there's already 50 comments, and I've only been running this for 10 minutes. So it's not that I'm ignoring everybody. I just want to be more present in the conversation and kind of let it flow for sure. Doctor, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about your background in terms of education and how you kind of were started to seen as like the one of the main faces of the studying of masculinity and specifically Black masculinism.
Oh man. Well, let me see. Bachelor's in Africana Studies and Philosophy out of Cal State Dominguez Hills, master's in African American Studies, Temple University, doctorate in Cultural Studies out of Claremont Graduate University. And I've been teaching here at Fresno State for 17 years. I've been teaching university level for 27.
Nice.
I started teaching university level at 21 years old. So, it started out pretty young. So it's almost 30 years as far as that. Um, but I didn't actually start focusing on Black males in my research until after I got to Fresno State. And, prior to that, I'd only pretty much been introduced to Black feminism as far as gender was concerned. So it wasn't until after that I started doing that research and really discovering what wasn't said about Black males. So that went on for a number of years. And then I ran into Dr. Tommy Curry, and we have a small cadre of brothers that, helped kind of formulate Black male studies. And Tommy kicked it all off with the Man Not, and we've all just been working to build from there. So there's a small group of a growing number of Black male scholars that have been coming up, getting doctorates in writing, putting out books, and that's the work we've been doing. So that's probably been, I think I met Tommy maybe 11, 12 years ago, something like that. So we've
Mhm.
been kicking it off from there. So that's kind of how it's been.
Mhm.
How it started, and it's kind of where it's going. But a lot of it was really just on the ground. I mean, I started teaching a Black male studies class before we had that terminology here at Fresno State, and I
Mhm.
mainly was doing it because I saw how Black males were being treated. I saw they didn't have much support, particularly here at Fresno. Um, and I've told this story before, but the very first day that I taught the class, I hadn't even walked into the room yet. There was a military recruiter and there was a police detective at the front door waiting for me. And I didn't even know who was taking my class yet. Hadn't opened the door, had no idea who was sitting in there. The
Mhm.
military recruiter wanted to, before I even gave my first lecture, he wanted to take the stage to invite some of my students to join the military and leave college. And the other guy was looking for a brother who was accused of knocking over a liquor store, and he wanted me to go in and point him out. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because it framed why Black male studies was so necessary. Because even in regard to how the public engaged us, the way they saw us was either somebody that needs to be, in the military, or somebody that needs to go to jail. And that was before the
Mhm.
first lecture was given. That was before I could even look at the students in my class. So that was the context for what really started to get me into this, made
Mhm.
me want to push more.
Wow, wow, that makes sense. And in hindsight, a lot of the guys that we're thinking of, like you, Dr. Tommy Curry, and others, we didn't realize the need for this,
Mhm.
and for until you guys actually put it out there, because we were all experiencing something when we grew up in certain environments in our home. We didn't realize what was actually happening to boys and men, especially to like Black boys and men. It was
Mhm.
just what everybody was kind of used to. And I'm sure as we dive into it and we kind of get to the gist of what those nuances were, it'll start to flesh out more for the audience what it is that why this was such an important thing to actually create a study out of.
Mhm.
Um, Recently, a lot more people over the last month or two have been talking so much about a woman by the name of Helen Andrews, right?
Yeah.
And she had did an essay or article or essay rather, and she spoke, and it was on the great feminization of Western civilization.
Right.
I was extremely impressed with how nuanced and in depth she was about it, and how she was able to scale it and track what it did and how it changed and morphed over time. What were your initial thoughts about her, the great feminization of Western civilization, presentation? Like, what do you think about it? What did she get right? Yeah, just overall, what was your opinion about it?
Well, my first thought, I was surprised. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
like, this is a conservative white woman, and they're kicking. I mean, because it's more than her. I mean, there were some white women scholars I ran into last year on YouTube that have done some work, and they were talking about feminization in the academy and whatnot, and they were as critical as she. I think hers was more general. They were more
Mhm.
specific to the academy, but I was still blown away that this conversation is coming out of women on the right. I didn't see any of that coming. It really kind of blindsided me. And the nature of the critique was sound,
Hmm.
addressing the shift in the culture in institutions to practices that are more accessible and practiced more so by women. I didn't expect that at all. I was blown
Hmm.
away by it. But after the initial kind of shock from it, when I thought about it, I said, well, as far as black men are concerned, we're the canaries in the mine on this. You know what I mean? In terms of the black community, we've dealt with feminization much longer, in a different kind of way. So, I wanted to, in my last show, just really start off and have a conversation about how much I appreciate where feminization is going as a critique, as a means of analyzing what's going on in everything from the job market to workplace climate to politics and so on and so forth. But there's always a unique kind of shift in the black community from the larger mainstream, because we kind of run into things differently. We have a different history, we have a different narrative. And so I kind of always want to maintain how we were introduced to these ideas. So whereas you have white folk who are really starting to examine this question of feminization within the last 5 years, in terms of how Helen Andrews framed it, we can talk about it going back to the 1970s and 80s in popular media. We can talk about it in terms of the workplace and the schools. We can talk about graduation rates, graduate school. There's so many different areas where
Hmm.
we can have this conversation where, as you said earlier, I saw these things, but I didn't really have a frame of reference for what I was seeing. I just saw them. I just experienced them. There's, like, for example, just off the cuff, there's been no college campus I've been to, as far as black students and faculty are concerned, where I've seen more men than women. Not one. I never thought about that. I just went
Yeah.
to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
At
didn't
least would you say in the last like what 20, 30 years?
yeah,
Probably.
about the last 30. Yeah. I started college in 92. Um,
Mm.
Everywhere I saw it was more, but I didn't even process that at the time. I
Same.
really came to that in retrospect when I thought about it, but I just accepted what I saw and I left it at that. I had no idea about what the implications of that were, and how that even affected, the college professors in terms of black men and black women and how that would play out. So these kinds of things she's pointing to as far as feminization is concerned, for a lot of us, it's going to be a lot of retrospection that needs to kind of take place. We're going to have to go back and recount, because for us, it's been something we can acknowledge for much longer
Hmm.
than some of these other groups. And so, and that doesn't necessarily have to, kick off any negativity. It's just acknowledging what is.
Hmm.
And so I think Andrews kind of opened a door to a conversation that we were touching on in these black spaces on YouTube, but I think she kind of framed it on a larger scale, and that allows us to kind of open that discussion up.
I appreciate that. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you felt like black boys and men were experiencing this great feminization of a particular culture or society earlier.
Mhm.
What examples can you give to kind of explain, especially for those who are hearing the whole great feminization of Western civilization? They're probably hearing this for the first time. Like
Mhm.
may have heard about like gender wars. They may have heard about like men and women not getting along and the divorce rates. But from the starting with the black community, and then we can kind of extrapolate or go to like the general population. What did you note of examples of what black boys and men were experiencing in terms of the feminization of the culture?
Well, a lot of it started with the exclusion of black boys, for example. I'll give you an example. Matter of fact, in the comment section of my last video, there's a brother that gets in there and he says, "I have a young son, and I was trying to find books, children's books for my son." He said, "I couldn't find any, but every one I did find were targeted for girls." Right? I've had other fathers, and I went through this when my son was young, looking for everything from after school programs to programs designed for black boys. Overwhelmingly, of the programs we found, they were targeted for girls. These are the kinds of low level things we started to kind of notice, right? If you talk about the pedagogy in the K through 12 classroom, much of it, and this is, across race, much of it is fixated on defining the ideal student really as female. It's not targeted for boys. And so you kind of see how the impact has been. If you look at the graduation rates in the last 10 to 20 years, they're overwhelmingly more female than male. especially when you talk about those who are going to into higher education as far as college is concerned. So you see these trends in different spaces. One of my main areas has been media analysis. And that started out because I was just teaching about stereotypes, and it was something I was drawn to. And as an 80s latchkey kid, my sister and I, all we did was watch movies.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it wasn't until retrospect that we really, I started to really pay attention to what I'd grown up watching. But in this kind of framework from the 1980s onward, you talk about Black men and women, and the narratives and experiences and even complaints that we have about everything from dating to marriage to so on and so forth. Black men really didn't have a platform on the same kind of scale that we saw happen with women. I mean, we had hip hop, we had comedy, they had Steven Spielberg directed movies. I mean, it was a global stage for a visual narrative about the experiences of Black women. You didn't see that same kind of access for Black men. Much of the time, we had to wait for Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, somebody else to say something that we kind of could have aligned with, but we didn't have a platform
Mm-hmm.
on that scale that we could really speak to. So there's so many different areas where you start to see this, but pulling them together wasn't the easiest thing to do because despite experiencing it, I really hadn't thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about whether or not you've ever had a Black male studies course, let alone degree, for those of you who went to college, it's not something you normally saw, right? You saw women's studies, you saw Africana studies, which in many ways is kind of overwhelmed in some respects with Black feminism. You really didn't see a framework for Black male studies. This is why it had to be introduced and created. The belief was anything that was happening in Africana studies, for example, or Black studies outside of Black feminism was somehow considered masculine and whatnot. But it really wasn't. And when you really start to go through, particularly The Man Not with Tommy Curry's book, you really start to see what conversation has not been happening about Black males. That's when you first begin to really pay attention to it and see what's been missing. So, that kind of focus is outside the discussion. So those are just some examples. If you want to talk about the percentage of male teachers versus female teachers from kindergarten through graduate school, what the differences are there in terms of that. And of course, especially in the Black world, the Black Academy, those are some of the differences we notice as well. So these kinds of differences in terms of whose narratives, whose voices are where, how they're acknowledged, what frame they're in, and who predominates in, physical numbers in some of these spaces, it varies. But much of the time, you notice in retrospect how, especially the higher up you go, you tend to be the only male in the room, or at least that was the experience I had, and many of my cohort colleagues had the same kinds of experiences in the places they were in. And to this day, I still get Black males finishing doctorates, working on doctorates at various stages of it. I think I'm sitting on about 5 or 6 different doctoral committees. I got one Thursday who's actually defending, but I'm on about 5 or 6 of them because these males are looking to deal with Black males in their research, but they're being attacked sometimes by their own committee, sometimes by their own committee chair, because for the most part, it's Black feminists that are the only ones there, and they're, kind of dealt with in a very hostile fashion, and they're looking for ideological support and, academic support, intellectual support, so that they can rationalize doing the work they want to do without being kicked out. And I've had a few of them experience that as well. But just trying to find resources, not only on Black men, but Black male scholars willing to talk about Black male studies, there's a dearth of that aspect as far as that's concerned. So, we could talk about, we can identify areas if you'd like, but
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let's start with, you mentioned education and the overwhelming percentage of teachers being women or female. A lot of ladies, and even some men that may side with the ladies, that think that, well, what's the issue with that? Like, people get to choose what profession they want to take, and they became teachers. So what's the issue with having such a heavy percentage of overwhelming majority of teachers being women? What could possibly be an issue?
Well, the people that predominate in a given space tend to set the culture, and this is what Helen Andrews was speaking to, really. When she was talking about, when women predominate in a certain space and they enact a culture that is gynofocal, and that becomes the standard for how things happen, it can become in and of itself alienating for men, right? So if you go back to teaching, if the majority of the teachers, especially the lower grades you go from kindergarten upward, are female, then the culture tends to, especially the pedagogy, tends to respond in that way, tends to function in that way. And boys find that their rates of punishment go up,
Mhm.
detention, expulsion, these kinds of things tend to go up. And then, of course, when you start talking about medication, when you start talking about treatment for behavior, when you notice that those things tend to go up as well. Very different if you go to Nation of Islam schools where they have male teachers and male classes, for example, very different response to the students, that whole kind of thing. So the people in the room tend to set the culture of the environment, and the culture of the environment more than often tends to benefit those that reflect the people in the room, and it operates very differently for those outside of that. So
Mhm.
that tends to be part of the issue. And as far as who's in the room, who gets affected, who gets to say what, who gets honored, who gets cherished, who gets punished, who gets dismissed. And we've seen this across race. I mean, we've seen the study a couple of years ago where they actually tracked the eye movements of teachers in K through 12 classrooms, K through 6, I believe, and they were looking at which people they pay the most attention to, which children, and it tended to be Black children, especially Black male children, right? But
Mhm.
these were coming from mostly white female teachers, and so you see in the dynamic of who they, and that was in terms of a punitive treatment, right? You see who they acknowledge as a problem, who they acknowledge as those who are doing well, and I witnessed that, with my own son growing up, in these environments. So the people in the room have a great deal of impact on who gets to do well, who gets to excel, and who doesn't. And that
Mhm.
becomes a conversation unto itself. The other part of the problem is, and this is coming from many of the young male teachers I've dealt with. I too had this experience when I was teaching K through 12 in the 1990s. Often the culture can be very hostile to Black men moving into teaching in a predominantly female space. One of the things we noticed is that the first things that would happen is they would often take the most challenging male students and put them all in the same room with whoever the male teacher is coming in.
Mhm.
Many of us had these kind of experiences. You had difficulty getting support. You had difficulty, enacting programs and ideas you might have to help with the kids. But they kind of, if you were a male teacher coming in, they'd send you all the male students that were a problem, and then
Yep.
just kind of leave you to your own devices to deal with it, whether you were trained for that or not. And of course, the burnout level would be extremely high. But the most difficulty the Black male teachers I've associated with had wasn't necessarily with the kids. It was with the kind of limitation with the administration and even the other teachers on being able to expand on what's been happening in the classroom and how they could take it to another level. So I'm bringing that up to say it's not just that the culture is influenced by the people there, but it can also be hostile to those that aren't part of that culture, that aren't part of that demographic and that's largely in position. And Black male teachers experience this even at Black schools with predominantly Black female teachers. And they
Mhm.
talk about this at length in my spaces. And they've been doing that for the last 8 or so years, about how the climate is hostile to not only themselves, but the ideas they have about how they can help Black male children. That
Mhm.
becomes a problem. And I noticed it even at Fresno State. We had those kind of situations happen when I first got there. We set up programs to help the kids. The majority of the faculty involved in those programs, just because of who was there in numbers, were Black women. And the response from that, as far as the students, is when you start to go to events, when you start to go to programs, it was overwhelmingly Black female students that were being drawn in, because they were being drawn in by Black female staff and Black female faculty. I had to create a separate program just to get the males, because they felt isolated, they felt excluded, they felt left out, and they felt like nobody was even bothering to talk to them. So, in other words,
Mhm.
the women faculty were looking for women students. It hadn't dawned on them to go get the male students. They operated with what they were familiar with, and that was their focus. So the
Mhm.
male students were just outside. So I had to go get them and bring them in and actually deal with them. And that for them was often the first time that a faculty person took interest in them, and directly went to go get them and saw the value in their presence. But a lot of young Black male students experienced that as well, from
Mhm.
kindergarten through college. So
Yeah.
demographics play a huge role.
Yeah, and this person said, Rashad Walker said, this is what's not brought up when women say we need more male teachers. They don't think about the environment of what the female staff and faculty creates
Mhm.
for those male teachers. It's not
That's
just about we need the male teachers to help with these males, these young boys and students. It's
mhm.
also about, well, he's going to view the level of threat
Mhm,
very differently when it comes to boys' behaviors, even outward behaviors, than many of the ladies will,
mhm,
where it's almost like he may potentially be more primed to be able to deal with it, be more patient with it, come up with other alternatives of how to address the behavior. Whereas a lot of ladies are kind of skewed with, once they feel something that feels a little threatening, their initial impulse is expulsion, is suspensions, is
mhm.
disciplinary. And like you mentioned, Dr. Umar would mention this as well, about when you move in that direction, and now the kid starts to be seen, especially from the mental health psychology side, as a problem. Now you're getting diagnosed with things,
Mhm,
oppositional defiant disorder,
mhm,
ADHD. Oh, now we
mhm.
have to separate them into another class. We got to get them on meds. If the kid doesn't want to be in a smaller class, if the kid's now surrounded by other kids who are also causing issues, now starts the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, you definitely see that. And
Wow.
at the same time, we can point out these same dynamics within the family. One of the things I've been talking about for some years now is what I call the gynapotestal family structure in the Black community. And that's basically female headed households, even within the same family, like where family is kind of like a satellite. You got the grandmother, who's the matriarch of the family, her daughters, having their own households where they are in charge of their households. And what you see in those spaces are boys that are expected, of course, to follow and do what they're told and so on and so forth. But the idea is that you still have this predominantly female-led space in,
Mhm.
in terms of these environments within these households. And so it's not that as a Black male teacher, you're coming to an all-female space, say, as a teacher, and that's the first time you've been introduced to it. Most
Mhm.
of us, many of us, I should say, grew up in spaces like that within our own families. And we saw how that dynamic worked out already. And some of the same complaints that teachers have, Black male teachers have in these spaces, are some of the complaints young men have in their own family structures. But these are the kind of dynamics that we're starting to create vocabulary for to make sense of our experiences. And that's one of the things that I think is useful and helpful so that we can actually begin to make sense of it and come up with various solutions that meet our needs.
And not only in the education space, because I sensed it in the education space, but on the psychology side.
Hmm.
Whereas I, got into my graduate program and we're starting to be exposed and being exploring different things, I started to notice something about, like, almost like a forced consensus on
Hmm.
certain things.
Hmm.
And for those who aren't really aware of what I mean by forced consensus, it was like, well, whatever the prevailing ideology or
Yep.
thought or new thing that we have to
Yep.
accept, if it's particularly and especially if you were a man in those spaces talking
Hmm.
about or questioning these things, when and Helen Andrews kind of mentioned this about how a lot of the ladies who operate in these spaces that are heavily dominated by women and heavily feminized, they're
Hmm.
big on group consensus, they're big on groupthink, and the people who question things or challenge certain narratives, they see them as almost like a threat. So when you're a
Yes.
man and a black man, or even a white man, when you're a man challenging these norms or
Yeah.
questioning some of the things that we're just accepting, whether it's in education or psychology, now you're being ostracized. Now you're a problem. That's when the
Yes.
complaints start, right? So
Yes.
I remember when I was going through some of your stuff, some of your videos and whatnot. I distinctly remember you noticing how when you would present information about women's perspectives on things, no pushback, no issue. But the moment you even would start to highlight things about men or males issues, especially in throughout society and culture, it was just doing that, just acknowledging that those inequities and inequality existed was like a problem.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Tell me more about that.
Well, that actually came from a class I taught at the Claremont colleges. So I had been at Fresno State for a while, and every
Mhm,
now and again I would go back and teach a course at Claremont, especially if the chair of the department there, who I had a great deal of respect for, if she needed, some extra teachers. So I'd go back. I'd commute once a week. I'd go teach a class. So this particular class was an Intro to Africana Studies course.
mhm,
And when I teach that course, I cover, basically give students a sampling of Africana studies, everything in it that I can get my hands on, just to give them a taste so they can decide if they want to major. When I get to gender, I always start with Black feminism, and then I go to womanism, because those are two different things, or at least
mhm,
it used to be. But anyway, and then the third thing, I didn't have a name for yet. I had just started to delve into Black males And I think at the time I was kind of referring to the treatment of black males as, gendered racism, but I didn't know how to frame it. It was still very early.
Mhm.
And so when I was teaching it, I decided this was going to be a class where I was going to try and introduce this area that I'm researching. So we did the feminist component, the black feminist component. They loved it because that's how they were trained. It was majority black females in the class.
Mhm.
Might have been 25, 30 students. I'd say 20 of them out of 30 were black women, right? So they loved that. When I got to the womanism part, I had a colleague of mine, give the lecture, and it was a woman. So, I knew if I gave it, it would have been a problem.
Yep.
So I said, okay, I let her do it. And because it varied from feminism, they didn't like it. But because it was a black woman who was teaching it, they kind of begrudgingly accepted it. But I
Mhm.
didn't have a framework. I hadn't come to Black masculinism. There was no black male studies yet. So at the time, I just had slides, PowerPoint slides with stats and charts on them, right? Black male homelessness, black male suicide, black male life expectancy, black male cancer rates, black male HIV rates, black male police homicide rates. I would just
Just
show
facts.
them images. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, data. That's it.
Mhm.
I didn't even say anything. I just would show them and they would, they knew they were supposed to take notes.
Mhm.
What I found is the women got more and more offended. By the next class, they had gone to the dean and complained that they felt physically threatened in my course. And
Mhm.
they felt like I might do something to them, right? Because of this. And that was it. The complaints came about just from me showing data. So it wasn't like I went into, my book or my publications none of that even existed yet.
Mhm.
These were just I was just seeing, these issues that I didn't see. Look, I mean, I did what, 3, 4 degrees. Nobody in any of the classes I'd ever taken from 1992 to 2007, bachelor's
Mhm.
degree to doctorate, nobody had talked about these issues pertaining to black men. And as I found more and more of them, I'm like, why is nobody talking about this? Why is
Mhm.
this not dealt with? So when I just introduced this to the students, the response was hostility. This response was frustration. Now the male students were different. They were
Okay.
scratching their heads. They were shuffling in their seats like, what is this? This is interesting. You know what I mean? But the women had a whole different posture. It was very much like this is an offense that we're talking about black males.
It
That
was
was
offensive.
actually a quote from one of the students.
It was offensive just to talk about data about how black boys and men are affected in society.
The only way you were allowed or expected to talk about black males in courses like that was critically, in the sense that they were a problem for someone. They were a problem in society. They were a problem for black women. You were allowed to talk
Mhm.
about it in those lines. And I actually did that early on when I first started teaching black male studies in general, or I don't think I could call it that. When I started teaching my black male class, because I was trained initially as a black feminist, I noticed that as long as I taught the class in a manner where black women could come and wag their finger at their black male classmates, that was acceptable. And that matter of fact, the numbers of students grew and grew every year.
Mm.
The more I actually started to foreground men's experiences and men's perspectives on everything from relationships to politics to whatnot, then I noticed the shift. Then I noticed the women's studies department backing off from my class and no longer they used to promote the class. They wouldn't do so anymore. Students would take offense. The feminist students would take offense. But I noticed more black males started taking the course. And often
Mm.
they would say this was the only time they felt like their experiences were valid. Their voices were being heard. Their experiences were actually being foregrounded in the narrative. And this is a class on black males. But even at that time, the women expected themselves to be at the forefront of dialogue and discourse in a black male studies course. So those are the kinds
Mm.
of experiences I noticed early on. So by the time I taught this class at Claremont, they actually, it tried to get me fired
Mhm.
on the basis of being what they considered a threat. Now, interestingly enough, I tried to tell, other black men, and I wrote about this, that actually is a form of discrimination that's unique to black males. You are considered not only a physical threat, but even a sexual threat in many different spaces. Because again, if we're dealing with this notion of feminization,
Yeah.
right? You saying things that are unappealing, things that they don't like, things that they take offense to. Now, notice they didn't say to the dean, we don't like this class because he's saying things that we just don't think are academically relevant. That's not what they said. They said we feel physically threatened in his classroom. I talk the way I do right now. I'm not in anybody's face. I'm not calling anybody out their name. I'm not grabbing students out their desks. There's none of that going on. But the fact that they labeled it as a physical threat tells you how, when as a man, you're in a predominantly female environment, you're introducing ideas that don't go along with the dominant narratives in those environments, they immediately weaponize their vulnerability as women, at least as long as we perceive women as being vulnerable and victimized by potential male violence. And they use that, they weaponize that to try and get me pushed out of the space. I am not the only one this has happened to. I share that story not because it just happened to me, but because I've seen it replicated in dozens of men over the last 15 years who find themselves in these spaces trying to have conversations that don't go along with the dominant narrative in those environments. Right. So those are the kinds of things that I noticed.
Related to exactly what you said about the weaponization of of their femaleness, and in regards to them always being seen, when particularly in relation to men, they're always automatically seen as the victim. And I wanted to bring up Me Too. Hear your thoughts about it, because I think a lot of what's happened with a lot of noticeable, observable changes that's happening between the sexes, men not approaching women in the same way. The workplace fraternizing is probably down to like in the negatives, and women are now talking a lot about men aren't approaching them the same. Men aren't coming to these the little dating events where, you know, the speed dating stuff. Men aren't showing up to that. A lot of ladies aren't being approached as much anymore. And even with what you just said, and I'm looking at Me Too. What are your thoughts about Me Too and how it's connected to the feminization thing? And what do you think's been the end result that's happened to men in general and just society as a whole as a result of like the Me Too movement?
I think it kicked feminization into a whole new realm. It kickstarted it. I think it was already happening, but much slower and at a lower level. And I think the Me Too movement definitely kicked it into overdrive. I think the dating issues and the interactions in the workplace between men and women, I think a lot of that was an unintended consequence of Me Too, because I think Me Too was conceptualized really as a feminist political tool. It was basically a tool to acquire power. And one of the things you'll notice, especially with, you know, upper level white women in some of these spaces, not only would those complaints, you know, result in the removal of whatever given man was accused, but the replacement of that high level man with a woman. Right. So what we're looking at with Me Too is a coup. It was a political coup that was really designed, in my humble opinion, around acquiring power for women in a very political fashion. I think the dating and the social implications reverberated in a way that I don't even think they saw coming. I really don't. But I do think it's happened nonetheless. I do think it's dramatically shifted the culture in terms of engagement. Even the very notion of the office party at work is dead. I mean, it's all, men understand that. I mean, you know, men do a cost benefit analysis, and it's just not worth it. It's not worth, you know, the reputational harm that easily comes about, because this is really mean girl politics. I mean, that's what a lot of Me Too turned into, which meant that, you know, for an entire gender, you can accuse anybody and evidence took a back seat. And this is one of the things Helen Andrew talked about as well. She was saying evidence can take a back seat to feelings, can take a back seat to perceptions. I mean, she brought up the Brett Kavanaugh case, and she said, you know, despite that there's no evidence, there's a woman here crying. And that took precedent over this question of evidence. I think that culture was inaugurated with Me Too in many ways, where whether you did something illegally, whether you did something, where you could be accused, evidence wasn't the primary focus, right? The primary focus was the accusation. And many Black men have known this since the days of lynching, right? The accusation is enough. You know, even if you proved innocent, right? It tends to stay with you. Just the fact that you were accused. So, you know, I think many men, non-Black men, this was their introduction to how that kind of reputational harm can happen with no evidence. I think for Black men, you know, we've experienced that for generations. That's nothing new.
Mhm.
You know, when just a word from a woman could result in mob violence and a lynching, you don't take any of that lightly. But I think the reason Me Too was such an issue for men, especially non-black men, is that this was their formal introduction to how that process can work. Your whole
Mhm.
life, your whole reputation, your career can be, destroyed on just the accusation. One of my good brothers in the space, some of my longtime listeners, will definitely remember the Green Gorilla on YouTube. The brother is brilliant. You can look up Green Gorilla channel. He doesn't really do videos anymore, but his videos are still there. But one of the ways that I met him is he was a philosophy professor, and he had a girlfriend he broke up with who was upset with him for breaking up with her. So she called his department and claimed that he violated her. There was no police record, there was no evidence, he had not done so, but that was enough. And not only was he fired, not only did that end his job, it ended his career as a philosophy professor.
Jeez.
And that was why he came to YouTube. He literally needed to eat. I mean, that was, but the fact that that could happen so arbitrarily with no evidence, nothing. He never called the police. There was no police.
Mhm.
There was nothing involved. And they never asked for a police record. Nothing. Gone. Simply because she was mad at him. That's
This
a lot of power.
this literally happens on college campuses all the time where
Yes.
they do their own investigations, don't include law enforcement, and decisions are being made about young guys' entire lives
Exactly.
and with little to no proof. And you mentioned it about what Helen Andrews stated, that a lot of the people who sides with the initial so-called victims or the potential victims, if it's a woman and she's crying and it's an accusation, the default position is she's innocent and she's innocent and he's guilty until proven otherwise.
Yes.
And I love what you said about how black men have known about this. Black men knew about Me Too before Me Too ever came out.
Mhm.
Our entire existence on this land,
Yes.
our default position when a woman was involved, especially a non-black woman,
Hmm.
was that he's guilty by default.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until in mass it started happening, especially publicly to non-black men, that now other men are like,
Hmm.
oh, this is an issue. Now
Yeah.
we got to be. And I'm like, okay, hold on, guys. Let's think about this for a second. Much of the things that ends up happening in culture and society, the starting point usually starts with the black community.
Yeah.
Much of the isms, much of the ideologies, much of the different things that's like, wow, how did we get here? Why are things so bad? Why are families so horrible? Why are men and women hating each other? This, and that. And what's the government's role in this and this institution and this influence? It usually starts here
Hmm.
in the black community, and then it eventually, you know, trickles out into the other communities. Am I onto something with that?
Definitely. We're canaries in the mine. You know, canaries in the mine. That's why it's even when you start to hear about this whole question of boys at the K through 12 level, what are they going through? What's happening with boys? For them, it's a new discussion. The black community, that's not new at all. We've been having that discussion for decades. It's very old, but it goes to your point. They only become important when it impacts other groups. But you know, black community, kind of experiences those things much earlier. So yeah,
Mm.
you're definitely right.
For those who aren't aware, and listen, y'all, if y'all are in the chat right now, we're up to 400 people currently live. So I know we ain't got 400 likes. So if you haven't liked this real quick, make sure that you like it. Make sure you send it to 2 or 3 people. I think it's going to be a really good and interesting conversation for both men and women to be able to learn more and more about how culture has changed. A lot of the complaints that ladies are talking about, where's all the men and where's masculinity? A lot of this is related to the topic we're talking about in terms of the overall feminization of culture and how it's really changed us so much and damaged so much. And now we're having to reevaluate how it's formed our lives, how we've been raised in it, surrounded by it. This is the equivalent of a fish that's been born in water and
Mhm,
not realizing what it means to be wet. That
mhm.
this is all around us between the educational system, the psychology field, et cetera, et cetera. So real quick, along with what you mentioned with Me Too, for those that haven't, I highly recommend looking at this brother's political agenda from 2024 with other contributors. He has a list of a whole bunch of, I think, what was it? trying to remember, it was 18 different unique policy measures. And one of them that you had mentioned for sure was a false accusation offender registry.
Right.
Please tell me your thoughts about that, because I had never thought about that before. I know we all had said like it's not right, it's not fair for
Mhm.
people to do false allegations, but I never thought about the idea of a false accusation offender registry. Please tell me more about what you're thinking with that.
Well, for anybody that has a question, my channel, the Onyx, where we have my show, the Onyx Report, we had, this is probably in 2020, I decided to create a black male political agenda. And these were basically policy ideas that come from black males themselves or anybody who's interested in seeing the quality of life improve for black men and boys,
Mhm.
any policy idea. And it ended up turning into what it is now, a 19-point agenda.
Yeah.
And it is available on my blog. It's freely accessible. I've had everyday people, I've had politicians, I've had governors, I've had presidents of universities reach out to me and ask me questions or tell me that they're implementing different aspects of it. So
Right.
it's definitely been around, but it's been since 2025 we've been building it. And most, I'd say 99% of the things on there are basically submissions by people. Now, one of those ideas, as you say, is I think that's point 18 on the list. Because right
Mhm.
after that, we came up with GI Bill reparations for black men who didn't get the GI Bill and their families were thus impacted.
Yeah.
But yeah, the false accusation offender registry was basically a way of holding, mostly women who had accused men falsely and didn't suffer any kind of repercussion for doing so, holding them accountable, having an accessible list where anybody anywhere from corporations to a mom and pop shop to universities to a school, anybody
Mhm.
can just basically go to the registry and look up people who've made false accusations. And this is again post Me Too, so
Mhm. Mhm.
we're arguing that there's a need for it, right? Because if you're falsely accused, especially if you had to do jail time, you'll find your name on a registry, but the person who falsely accused you has no repercussions. And in many instances,
Mhm.
they don't even, whether it's an article or online, their name doesn't even have to be listed, let
Mhm.
alone
Mhm.
their face. So you have these kinds of accusations that have taken place. I know there have been plenty, but the last one that came to mind is just what Michael Graham is talking about, the Chris Brown kind of
Mhm.
incident. I thought about that, where he was accused, and when he showed evidence of her texts to him, she disappeared. Her lawyers dropped her and disappeared. She disappeared, but her name didn't even have to come out. Her face didn't even have to come out. And had he not saved those, texts, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And that's a celebrity. So what happens to the everyday guy that may not have the kind of clout that he had? What
Mhm.
happens when you're caught up in an accusation? You didn't do it, but it's your word against hers. And in this post Me Too environment, the kind of momentum is rooted in this Victorian notion of femininity, which is that women are innocent and delicate, and it's these big bad nasty men that are always causing these problems. That
Mhm.
kind of dynamic, creates a one way, in many respects, a one way kind of punitive environment for men. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's where we came up with the false accusation offender registry. But we got 18 other areas, and each area there has subpoints. Now, the very first one that black
Mhm.
men chose themselves was
Mhm.
family court reform,
Family court reform. Yep.
and that has the most subpoints. It has 18 subpoints. I think the only one that has anywhere near that is the criminal law reform, point six, and that has 13 subpoints. So you can see, as far as on the ground, what black men are grappling with. Family court reform is one of the biggest issues that they have. So those 18 subpoints speak more directly to
Mhm.
what it is they're looking for. But those are the kind of things I wanted to list down and have in a static space where anybody can look them up. And I'll be real quick with this. One
Uh-huh.
of the reasons I wanted to do that was because I noticed every presidential election, period, they would eventually ask black men, at least once. They'd ask black men what we want. And they'd go to a barber shop and set up this fake narrative where, the
Yep.
politician in question was going to ask a few black men around the barber shop what they want. Black men mostly, you'd be hard pressed to find black men that could name 5 issues that men themselves, policy wise, are looking for,
Mhm.
because we're not trained to think of ourselves as a separate demographic. Now, black women are a whole different matter. They have been training at least since the 1980s to think about themselves as a political demographic, as a social demographic that can stand on its own.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the case for Black men. Black men talk about things that would benefit the community, but if
Yeah.
you ask them what's specific to Black males, you might get some silence. So one of the reasons we created the list is so that Black men could have something to refer to. And I found that men have been blown out of their chairs about how much of their lives they can see in the list and how many things could have been dramatically different had these policies been implemented on any level.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, if you're interested, look up the Black Male Political Agenda, Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. It should come up for you pretty easily. It's on my blog, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. It's the pinned blog at the top, and you can actually go through it yourself.
I appreciate that, and the more that you explain it, the more I'm realizing, and I highly recommend. Doesn't You don't have to be Black to read it. Number one,
No,
I
no.
think it's important for even non-Black men of all shades, to
Mhm,
start to form a political identity around understanding why things aren't equal, things aren't fair,
mhm.
and that the reason why you've never thought about some of these things is because you've grown up in a feminized, matriarchal, gynocentric culture
Absolutely.
where the idea of men having such high rates of self-deletions,
Mhm.
that's horrible, and the loneliness epidemic, that's bad. But just realize that if it was in the reverse,
Yeah.
that policies and things will be put in place to address that issue.
Mhm.
And there's a reason why Mother's Day is treated the way that it is and Father's Day is treated the way that it is. Like, once you start seeing it, it's like your eyeballs open and you're like, oh my God, this is
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere, right? And
Yeah.
I saw it and noticed it in my field of mental health.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until about 2020, 2019, 2020 is when I started to notice something was wrong.
Mhm.
And it was the force consensus of adopting new language and ways to describe people who choose certain identities.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, well, wait a minute. A, our entire discipline was about, despite popular belief, we actually have to use screening tools and
Mm.
assessments to actually scale, how severe symptoms are and measure it and measure by data to see if the person's getting better or their symptoms are worsening. It's not quite as simple as just talking and just going with the flow. There's actually
Mhm.
more of a methodology to it. And then when it got to stuff like gender, this was the first time that I was being forced and people were being forced into doing and
Yeah.
acknowledging and affirming things. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, but that
Right.
kid is 12. I'm like, are we sure? And I was like, well, hold on, because the DSM 2, 3, and 4 said this. And
Mhm.
now that the DSM 5 says this, we now have a whole. So the thing that I would have normally just described as gender dysphoria and left it at that, now we're doing medical interventions, and
Mhm.
then I'm looking at the data and talking about all the people who will regret the moves that they're making. And I'm like, hold on.
Mm.
Am I Are we sure this is how we should be approaching it? And then when I started to give a little pushback and questions, it was like, and then as I started to question the field itself, and I'm like, the field is about 75, 80% women now. And by 2030, there's estimates with the way things are going and the sheer amount of men that are not entering into college to get into
Yep.
psychology.
Yep.
Men in mass have left psychology as a field. And I'm learning and observing. I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. If it's all about being accepted, consensus,
Mhm.
groupthink, all about not offending others and wanting to always honor feelings above everything else, what's the demographic that's dominating the space? It's women. And I was
Mhm.
like, hold on. If more people than ever before are engaging in mental health and socially, in terms of the social construct is completely broken down between families and marriage and men and women, and more women are going to this than ever before, what would happen if the field is dominated by women that are feminists or covert misandrous?
Yes.
And what would the impact be on men and these women's lives and their marriages and their family units?
Mhm.
And I realized, like, much of what's been destabilized,
Mhm.
much of what's happened, much as what's been pushed, and because they had a professional pushing it, the
Yes.
professional was suggesting it, we have a group of people that are anti-children, anti-men, and anti-family
Mhm.
that are therapists.
Yes.
I saw it.
They're the
I see it
norm.
now. What do you think about that?
No, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Okay.
yeah, they're the norm. That's the problem. The idea, at least, was that maybe those people were on the fringes, but what we're noticing is that they're the norm. I mean, just over the last 5 years on Twitter, it was interesting for me to see how many Black women counselors and therapists would show up and just have these extremely misandrous takes on Black men and who they are and what they're doing and what they need to be doing, they're full throated and feel free to speak it, and they're authorized and by their own disciplines, because there's no pushback. There's no pushback ideologically. There's no pushback in the classrooms with students discussing, because it's, as you said, this is kind of forced consent. And I've kind of noticed, especially in the academy, that feminism tends to function more like a religion, in the sense that it doesn't have to answer questions to justify its existence. It's expected that you take it on face value
Mhm.
because it's proposed and it's been put on the table. That in and of itself is a problem, because, in an academic space, the idea is that there needs to be some kind of objectivity. But going back to Helen Andrews,
Mhm.
objectivity is considered, in some respects, a male preoccupation. Right. The fundamental problem with feminization for me is
Mhm.
when you talk about consensus, forced consent, even, as far as forced consensus, but the idea of validating feelings, what nobody wants to talk about is whose feelings get to be validated. If the dominant group in there are white women, right, then whose feelings are irrelevant to the discussion, especially if you're the lone Black male in a class full of white women. Your feelings don't tend to get validated, right? Same thing,
Mhm.
unfortunately, happens in a classroom of predominantly Black females, and you're the only Black male in the room. You'll find that your opinions don't tend to get validated either. The people in the room, the people that create the culture, tend to not only follow these kinds of practices that are consistent with how women tend to communicate and interact socially and so on and so
Mhm.
forth, but with the other part of it, which I'm glad Andrew spoke to, was that
Mhm.
they actually exclude those that don't fall in that line, which especially tend to focus on heterosexual males, heterosexual Black males in particular. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's the fundamental issue I have with feminization. It's not just that things are shifting culturally within institutions and environments to suit women's worldviews and ways of doing things. It's
Mhm.
also the exclusion. It's as I've said about feminism and Black feminism for years. It's not the fact that it exists that made it a problem. It's the fact that misandry became a part of how feminism was conceptualized. That in and of itself didn't have to exist. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
advocate for women and you don't have to necessarily downplay men. You know what I mean? But the fact that those two became linked,
Yeah.
that became a problem in and of itself. So we've seen
Wow.
it replicate itself in families and social environments and work environments and on all kinds of levels. It's ridiculous, but that's
Mhm.
what we're grappling with.
Wow. Wow. Like, I'm thinking about it now, and you said this is creating an environment in all of these contexts where objectivity is seen as an option and their feelings are treated as religion.
Well, feminism in and of itself is treated as religion, but feelings are treated as a default norm, as long as the people in the room share the sentiment, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
just like you talked about with your experiences in those courses, when you spoke out against it, there was a problem, and you became the problem. You
Yes.
became the face of it, and then of course you gotta worry about whether or not this will have an impact on your career. I mean, you're in classes, you're still trying to get the degree, you haven't even got out of the gate yet, and you
Mhm.
already have to worry about how this will impact you simply because you didn't agree, or really not even that, you raised questions.
Literally.
You didn't say you disagreed, you just said, I raised questions. That in and of itself was a problem. And
Mhm.
Helen Andrews was speaking to that as well. The fact that you're raising questions is a masculine engagement in a feminine space,
In
and it's
and of itself.
considered a hostile gesture. You know,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. In and of itself. And what's crazy as I think about this now is there's data starting to come out now that it turns out that the T part of the LGBTQ agenda is starting to look like it's starting to sound and look more like a social contagion,
Oh,
because
oh, yeah,
now people are now starting to not identify with it as much.
yeah.
The rates are starting to decrease, in terms
Mhm.
of students who, especially students and young people who were outwardly stating this is what it is, this is how I identify.
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden it kind of started to really pop off around 2015, 2014. And now there's starting to be data that's starting to come from 2024 till now that's starting to show that the trend is starting to decrease. And
Mhm.
I'm like,
Yeah.
so those of us who are ahead of the game, who were trying to say this is starting to look more like a social contagion, and this is more of groupthink, and this is absolutely not.
Mhm.
From a psychology perspective, this doesn't happen the way it doesn't happen at the speed that it happens organically. Like it doesn't, you don't quadruple and triple numbers and rates like this
Mhm.
with any of the other diagnosable related issues. But in this particular situation, now everybody's it. And I'm like, so I appreciate you stating that about how now what happens is once you question something and you don't agree and you don't conform, typically you either have to leave, you have to be
Mhm.
quiet, or
Mhm.
you have to fake submit and fake agree
Yes.
in order to just be able to kind of continue.
Right.
And Orwell kind of talked about this a lot, where it's like a lot of civilizations that are going to be co-opted and captured, they're going to focus on the women and children.
Mhm.
As if they can get a hold of the women and children and their minds, you can effectively destabilize and take over um a culture. So I man, I appreciate you because this has been awesome.
I wanted to say something to something you said a moment ago. What I found interesting as a parallel when you were talking about trans and how it's being perceived. I mean, there was a point in time where if you questioned anything about it, that was inherently it. You were a problem. What I find interesting about it is the questioning of it is taking place right alongside white women's disapproval of it, especially when you talk about
Mhm.
sports.
Mhm.
When you talk about trans presence in sports, women's sports in particular. Notice how the criticisms of trans seem to go right hand in hand with white women's disapproval of it. When you start to hear white feminists, especially second wave feminists, who they call them turfs, that started to take issue with how trans relate to women. And so it's kind of interesting to me that it became publicly okay to at least begin to question right around the time white women started to take issue with it. But prior to the whole sports issue, white women especially seemed to be highly supportive of it. And if you questioned it, you were inherently, transphobic and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So it's just kind of interesting to see, going back to feminization, whose feelings get validated, who get to raise questions and whatnot. Now, the questions can be raised, but it has to be in the framework of that consensus. And as
Mhm.
long as the consensus allows for those questions, because white women found their positions threatened, they were losing awards, they were losing,
Yep.
competitions now. So it became acceptable within that framework. And now all of a sudden it's okay to question. But,
Mhm. Mhm.
but yeah, so you're on. And so I'm
People
just,
lost jobs, people
yes,
lost entire careers, people lost
yes,
licenses
yes.
over that issue and obviously COVID, during 2020. These were the 2 pivotal issues where I saw it, like, at its worst.
Mhm.
Even just how controversial it was to say men and women are different.
Yes.
Like,
You shouldn't even say
and,
that.
like, and the crazy part is our experiences, the court system, reproductive rights, everything says we're different, but
Mhm.
just saying out loud, men and women are different,
Yeah,
suddenly it's all this pushback, especially I'm assuming in academia and in other professional spaces.
definitely.
So
Definitely.
I wanted to show you this real quick from Brutal Reviews BCW. He says, "Don't forget black women conspiring with the Klan on Clubhouse last week." Did you hear or see about this? Because I
Yeah,
just saw it and talk with the guys at Daily Rap Crew on Saturday about this.
mm,
About and for those who aren't aware, this is where in our community, we love coming up with new terms. Well, in all communities, I guess people love coming up with new terms to call different things. So there's black women who have sworn away from wanting to deal and date and deal with black men, and they
mhm,
call themselves divestors. And
right.
apparently, there was a chat that was screen recorded where it was black women talking to white men
Mhm,
about asking them to deal with black men in the community by force.
right.
Not in some whole, we need to protect the community, but it was more so through the lens of like, you need to snuff them out.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
what are your thoughts about how it's gotten to this point? And yeah, what are your thoughts about that, man? Because I think what happens is when I talk about women in our community and things that need to improve or change, the hope is for reunification. The hope
Mm,
is for their outcomes to look better, for less single parent homes, for more marriages, for more stability in the community. That's why I'm isolating and talking about these things. And I've been trying to explain to a lot of the ladies in the space, the women you surround yourself with, the way that you're voting, who you're aligning with, constantly
mhm,
demonizing men. You're on the spectrum of women who are actually acting and talking like this.
mhm,
And you may not realize how closely your talking points and ideology is very similar to theirs, where it's of either subtle, simmering, or even outright hatred
mhm.
towards men or specifically black men. So, what are your thoughts, man, about this crazy shit, crazy stuff?
I mean, to me, this is a snowballing. I mean, if you look at the late 1970s, when you started to really see black feminism starting to congeal in and of itself, it still was considered a fairly isolated kind of phenomenon necessarily. But by the time you get to the early 1980s, you see it transitioned into the mainstream through people like Oprah Winfrey, who popularized it. I always call her the spigot, right? You know, the moment she turned the faucet on, a lot of that was kind of transferred to the mainstream from these fairly obscure spaces. And it really began to be digested in that time period. So I grew up in the time period where I heard 17-year-old girls saying you needed to have six figures to date them.
Mm,
Well, you know, which by the way, I
mm,
still have them saying to the 17-year-old young men sitting right next to them in
mhm,
classes when they're both first generation college students and come from no money and have no inheritance. But this has now
mhm,
become the standard because it was introduced in the 1980s, right? So this is what I saw coming up at that time. Those kinds of unrealistic standards, those kinds of misandrous narratives about men being essentially objectified in ways that weren't we didn't have a vocabulary for at that time. But this was the earliest stages of it, and it snowballed from there, and it became publicly acceptable to demand more, to objectify black men, especially even more, reduce black men really to disposable kind of concepts and experiences. But nonetheless, this is where it snowballs, and so to me, it just seemed like it came out of that stream when we think about this clubhouse conversation that was taking place or divestors in general, because in and of itself, just like I said earlier, you can be a divester, you can say I don't want to date black men, but how does that have to become these men should die?
yeah.
Right, the two didn't need to be linked. If you
I've
just don't want
never
to date
heard
black
I've
men,
never heard passport bros
no,
be
no,
like, "We need these black women need to die." They be
we-
like, I had negative experiences. I hate this. I hate that. I'm dating elsewhere." I just don't recall this huge that like this to the level of where you're wishing them to die.
But I think there have been so many different influences that have contributed to that. I mean, going back to media, there have been, when we talk about the whole notion of female superiority in media, right?
Yeah,
We've seen this in the last number of years. Girls and women are presented as smarter, more capable, and stronger. You got 110-pound women knocking 250-pound men through walls.
that's why
They're,
Disney looks so crazy right now.
exactly, right? But it's become normalized in many respects. We're not surprised to see it, right? But when you think about it, there have been millions of instances, and I've watched this, especially with young men, but who are taking these images in. I mean, my son was 12, and when he first told me, he said, Dad, I've never seen a man or male beat a female at anything in media, TV, cartoons, movies. He had never seen a male beat a female at anything. And I'm thinking that's interesting. So when you look at that and you start to put it into context, when you think about media, right, you basically have each person that has watched TV, has been on the internet, so on and so forth. You've likely had millions of instances of this kind of micro programming that's taken place. Right? Micro programming. You've
Mhm.
you've watched millions of instances where women have been smarter, better, stronger, more capable in every context. Now, what happens to the average person if you've been introduced to millions of those incidents? And the stories are almost irrelevant, but the stories are all over the place. It could be a dream sequence, it could be a sci-fi movie, it could be a romance. It doesn't matter. The context may change, but the imagery is still consistent. Women are fundamentally your superiors. You are insufficient. You are less than. When you have that kind of idea being pumped through every media vehicle possible, alongside policy that has traditionally and historically allowed, particularly in the black community, Black men and women to have different experiences, right? In terms of access to resources, in terms of, when you have those kind of things reinforcing your life experience on a material level, experiential level, just the media intake, these things take on a bent of their own. So it
Yep.
doesn't surprise me when you reach a point where these women are at the point of calling for black male death. I mean, especially if you've gone to college and I've seen them socialize the way they have, where black women are essentially living in these kind of social bubbles amongst each other, where their narratives are uninterrupted by men's experiences, men's perceptions. They're able to function strictly on watching shows that are created for and by women, talking to each other, socializing with each other. So these opinions and perspectives are able to grow in extremity without any pushback from men, because we have vastly different social spaces. And there's a kind of solipsism that I've been talking about for years that many of these women can have, where they're able to function as if no one else exists. And so it doesn't surprise me that it can reach such a point with some women where it becomes that hostile, where they're calling for death. Or what we've seen in Twitter over the years, where black men were considered bullet bags.
Yeah.
And when have you ever heard that language before?
Never.
Where black men are considered bullet bags, right?
Never.
It's unprecedented. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I think when you look at the environment and you look at what's been happening, it's almost kind of inevitable that you're going to reach that kind of extremity at some point. But I think we finally hit the pushback point, though. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we should have caught it when they were talking about, if you are pregnant and you find out you're going to have a boy, abort it.
Yeah.
We should have caught it when they would say things about we should have caught it with stuff like that. We should have caught it where every time a black man gets accused of something, the default position, they know who they're going to side with. And if it turns out he gets accused of something by a non-black woman, they say he deserves whatever happens to him. So I think that we kind of sat on the sidelines. And when I talked to the brothers at Daily Rap Crew this weekend, and I told them this is I think when we're doing this little, let's debate on social media, let's debate on these podcasts, I don't think people realize truly how terrifyingly dangerous this ideology can be and lead to. It's not just about false allegations. It's not just about potential jail time for people that don't deserve it. Men are going to lose their lives when you have women with this ideology that will use other men as a means to cause harm to men. Fellas, you should know this, and many of you may have experienced it. The subtle signs of it. When you mentioned about the professor who, when he wanted to break up with the girlfriend, she calls the university, makes a claim, completely ruins his career. Fellas, these are the wake up calls. When you see, and this is not just about the ladies that outwardly do it. It's also about those that silently co-sign. They share, they like, they don't distance themselves from the women in their lives that think this way, act this way, talk this way. And one way that you can see if they tell themselves is that they'll have two different lenses, two different tiers of how they're viewing information. So when we talk to women about equality and things not being fair, in their worldview, in their mind, there's a reason why that is. So what as an example, when we say, we this isn't fair, this isn't equal, paternity tests, we think that there should be mandatory paternity tests, and you'll see women balk at that, and we were like, wait a minute, shouldn't every child know who their father is, and shouldn't every man know? And then there was an invasion of her privacy, and you're accusing her of cheating and blah 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 blah. And it's like, but it's not fair, it's not equal. And when you go example by example as example, whether it's 50-50 custody, they would have problems with that. And when you realize is the women who are the most captured mentally, emotionally, intellectually in this space, they won't give an inch to anything where they see or are told or is brought to their attention, hey, this isn't fair, this isn't equal, this is a detriment to families, children, or men. If it's an expense of everybody else, this needs to be more equal and fair. The people who have that type of mentality, they won't give an inch on any of those topics.
Right.
They're always going to have a built-in justification for why women should still have the leverage. why
Mhm.
they should still have the authority and why they should still have the power. So fellas, if you come into contact with ladies in your family, in your social circles, in the workplace, do the best you can to quietly distance yourself from those individuals, because at any point in time they can use one of those strategies or techniques that Dr. Hasan has kind of touched on. So I'm sure you might want to respond to what I just said.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, I'm hoping I didn't just lose it because I started to go somewhere else with it. But one of the things that comes to mind, if you say online that Black men in particular, but men in general, have started talking to each other in the last decade, right? I think it's
Yep.
safe to say what we call these red pill spaces, let's say at least a decade, especially in the Black community. Women have been having these dialogues amongst themselves for 35 years prior to that.
Easily.
We didn't have, and I said this earlier, we didn't have a platform. They had a platform. They had television shows, they had talk shows, they had movies. You started to see them organizing on college campuses. And then after they graduated, they started to work and create businesses, entrepreneurial projects, nonprofits. This all of that dialogue turned into these kinds of practices that took place with them. We didn't have that. As I said earlier, you had to wait. Remember watching Eddie Murphy Raw for the first
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
Remember when he talked about Johnny Carson losing half of his money to his wife who never told a joke?
Yep.
Men lost their minds. You saw them cheering, but the reason they were cheering is because we didn't have a platform to. Now that seemed like common sense in 2025, but
Mhm.
when that film came out, there was no dialogue about that. We didn't even have a space to have it, but we were watching women have it, right? And we were mostly just kind of watching it and taking it in. But it took until about a decade ago before men started to compare notes, and it took social media and the internet for that to happen. So now you have men who are couch surfing, and the only thing they have to their name is a smartphone. And then you have CEOs of banks, that are on, and they're in the same shows, in the same comment sections. Now they're having dialogues. In the first few years of me being in the space, one of the things I noticed was that men were for the first time ever, they were able to compare notes.
Yep.
They were able to say, well, I went through this experience. I went through a divorce and the courts gave her everything and I didn't have a leg to stand on. So now you had men in New York and California and Texas and Philadelphia and who are able to say, well, I had that experience too. And then this happened. And then so they're comparing notes. And then all of a sudden, I started getting messages from South Africa.
Yep.
I
Same.
started getting messages from Ghana, from China, from Britain. I'm getting messages from around the world, from Canada, where men are saying, we're going through that here. So now you have this kind of global framework, but it takes place 35 years, at least for the Black community, 35 years after Black women have already been on their whatever their journey is, if you will. So it's taken that long for us to craft a dialogue. I mean, the whole purpose of my show was to create vocabulary, because none of the vocabulary terms that I've run across really fit the Black male experience in terms of what we go through and so on and so forth. But it took that much time, and we're still having these discussions. And so it's interesting to me to see how upset people are over men starting to compare notes and come to their own conclusions. But to me, you have to be oblivious to the 35 years prior to that, where women were running roughshod and coming up with whatever they wanted, and nobody had anything to say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of it.
Mm-hmm.
If your grandmother required men of her time to make six figures to be worthy of dating her, how many of us would even be here right now? He has to own a house. He has to own a car. He has to make the six figures of his day. He needs to be over 6 feet tall. He needs to have, that was ridiculous. But somehow in the 1980s, that became acceptable. It became the norm, and it's only snowballed ever since. To this day, when I ask my students, how many of you, by show of hands, have a list of standards for who it is you plan to date and or marry, 99% of the time, it's only the women that raise their hands. The men don't. That's not, but that's because they've had that dialogue. They passed it down from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter. They passed those narratives and discourses down within the family. And I grew up in a family full of women, so I saw the war councils in the living room. I heard the phone calls with my mother on the phone with her girls. I heard all of that. I didn't understand it. I logged it, came back to it later, but I was witness to it, and I saw how it happened. advice
Mm-hmm.
on how to take a man in family court, advice on how
Mm-hmm.
you can get him for every penny, and not necessarily because he did something wrong, but because he didn't meet your expectations in some fashion. You've been thinking about marriage since you were 5 years old. You had ideas of what a husband was supposed to do. You didn't communicate that to the man you married, but now he's going to be held accountable for things that you expect of him that he didn't even know about and may not have ever been able to do, depending on how realistic they are. And
Mm-hmm.
yet you're able to use an institution like the family court to eviscerate him. It's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily because you yourself are that powerful, but that you have institution and policy that has traditionally been allowed you to operate in that fashion. You can call the police and tell them he abused you and be more readily believed than a 6'10", 250-pound man calling the police to say, my wife just punched me.
Yeah.
Right. And so as long as these institutions and policies have deferred to women, that has given them a degree of power that men haven't had. And with that, we've been subject to trying to deal with it. But as men have started to compare notes and started to come up with their own agendas and narratives, right? We saw it culminate with Kevin Samuels
Yep.
in
Yep.
2020, and we've seen others like yourself coming out of those discussions and pushing it further. It's interesting to see how many people are frustrated by that, but have nothing to say about the 35 years prior to that,
Either.
where, nothing to say. And men were relatively silent much of that time.
Pretty much. We were so desensitized and it was normal. Like
Yeah.
and I appreciate you highlighting Obsidian said last week when I asked him about the gender war. He said women have been talking our lives and our father's lives and our grandfather's lives. It wasn't considered a gender war until men started talking.
Exactly.
And to know how feminized the culture and society is and how everybody's been brainwashed by this.
Mhm.
Ladies don't view men talking inherently as the problem. They view men talking in a way that doesn't agree with women, doesn't
Exactly.
talk only favorably and only highlight women's positive behaviors. They're
Exactly.
fine with that. That's why the
Yeah.
panderers are taking all their money. That's why the
Mhm.
black men and the
Yes.
men, that's why all the men that's in these on these microphones that are just telling women, girl, he don't deserve you. And if he won't do it, another man will. And you're reinforcing an ideology that there's
Mhm.
nothing for her to change. The
Mhm.
problem is the man.
Mhm.
This is why so many of them think whenever a relationship ends, he's the narcissist. It's
Yes.
because they've been conditioned to. This is why so many of them don't apologize. Guys, if y'all see what we're talking about,
Mhm.
it's rampant. The lack of accountability, the lack of apologies, the everybody in my past is a narcissist. I felt threatened just because he disagreed with you. Men, they'll in the same sentence tell you about what a real man is and what men should do and what men's responsibilities are, and then also tell you stay out of women's business and don't talk about women.
Mhm.
In their mind, it's not a double standard. The standard is we have one standard for women and we have a totally different standard for men, and there is a cohesive. It falls within the feminist gynocentric model. When you guys understand that, it's not just about a lot of them are willfully just doing this. They have been trained since
Yes.
young girls
Yes.
to think and see the world through this lens. And
Mhm.
how do we know that the culture has been feminized? Because when you go to other countries that are not westernized and have not been
Yes.
overly feminized, it
Yes.
is the exact opposite.
Yes.
It's the
Yes.
exact opposite. And
Mhm.
and it's like they'll simultaneously tell you why they'll reject a man. He's not tall enough. Like you said, he doesn't make six figures or more. He doesn't have a beard. He's not funny. He doesn't have this. He doesn't have that. And they'll have all these reasons for why they can disqualify you. But
Mhm.
if they find out that you're dating outside of your race, culture, or outside of the country, they have an issue with that. And now they have to pathologize and say that you're evil and trying to take advantage of these women. It's because literally in their mind,
Mhm.
there's a standard for women and there's a standard for men. And feminism and this whole gynocentric model was never about equality.
No.
It
No.
was always about female power and influence and the ability to shape culture to be at the benefit of and the advantage of women. And
Mhm.
only the women that agree with them, not
Exactly.
the women who don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
So
pygmies.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
They're pygmies from that point, and they become attacked, along those lines. But there's something when you talked about how this relates to feminization,
Mhm.
the one thing I wanted to add to that is what's considered the opposite of feminization, masculinization, even though we don't hear that term necessarily.
Mhm.
is one of the things they oppose. And one of the ways it's marked, and even Andrews talked about this, is by things like empiricism, right?
Okay.
Things like verification. If we were to talk about DNA, notice how hostile, right, the sisterhood tends to be at such ideas, right? And when
Mhm.
you talk about DNA testing from birth, as you brought up earlier, which is also on the black male political agenda, why exactly is that frustrating? Why is that problematic? Well, it has the potential of revealing that a woman may have been dishonest. She may have been trying to exploit somebody. She may have gotten pregnant from one guy, but chose another one because he has more money, has more resources, is more stable, whatever the logic may be. Right.
Mhm.
But to reveal that about her is inherently problematic. So we have to give her the space to do whatever she wants. And men are thus held accountable by courts, by police officers, by judges, so on and so forth. We have institutions that force men to participate in the narrative she's created, but we can't hold her accountable. So whether you're
Mm.
talking about empiricism or DNA evidence, we need to skip around that. And I'll show you a very subtle way that that tends to happen. I remember one of the things that got me started studying black males is after I graduated with my doctorate. Again, I was, I was trained under black feminism at the time.
Mhm.
I'll give you just a small example. One of the points they were raising in 2006, 2007 is the rate of black women who were being incarcerated. And they were saying the rates were through the roof. Nobody's paying attention. And I was just like, wow, this is ridiculous. This is sexist. This is what it didn't dawn on me to actually look at raw numbers until a couple years after I graduated. And on a lark, Saturday, I'm just sitting there with my son watching TV. I just thought, let me look up the number of people incarcerated. It was like 200,000 women and 2.2 million men. And in the black community at that time, it was over 840,000 black men incarcerated and like I think it was like 60,000 black women.
Mm.
So here I am in doctoral classes hearing about the rate of women being incarcerated, but nobody would mention the raw numbers, right? They played with rates. And at the same time, because I was in cultural studies,
Mhm.
I did an Africana studies degree under the moniker of cultural studies. So they hated that. But anyway, one of the things that most of my classes focused on was how empirical data was useless. It was easily malleable. It was not dependable. So instead, we just kind of went with attitudes, perspectives, and feelings under the guise of lived experiences, but we stayed away from empirical data.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get introduced to it until after I graduated. And I found that I was in a very feminized space, and that when you actually started to look at the raw data, there were narratives that weren't being explained. They weren't even being introduced that I had to go discover on my own. And that's when I started to realize what Helen Andrews is talking about, how widespread and dangerous it is because you're lulled into a sense of what truth is based on moods, based on outlooks, based on feelings, experiences, but you're discouraged from actually looking at data. Right. So whether we're talking about data in these discourses in an academic environment, or whether we're talking about DNA testing at birth in a social environment with families, verification against an empirical standard is downplayed in a feminized environment because it puts the narrative under threat and it does not allow us to follow through with whatever the forced consensus you brought up earlier may be.
Mhm.
Holds it to a standard that it can't change and shift out of arbitrarily because it has to meet this question of what the empirical data lays out. But that's viewed as masculine,
Yes.
not viewed as feminine.
Yeah,
So
that's why it's seen as so
it's
threatening.
huge. I'm sorry.
That's why it's seen so as a threat.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. So those are the kind of experiences that I know I came through,
Uh-huh.
and so I'm finding this period extremely interesting, and I'm lifted by what I'm seeing men do, because
Mhm.
I'm watching men, black men in particular, speaking up in ways that I didn't know if I would ever see in my lifetime.
Mhm.
There are things that black men are speaking out against now that I just didn't, I never imagined
We
could
couldn't
take
do it in our families. We couldn't do
place.
it in church,
No,
right?
no.
So doing it on the internet where everybody knows, you could only imagine what that's been like.
Mhm.
And you touched on it briefly about the domestic violence thing, intimate partner violence.
Mhm.
Um, the narrative is, and a lot of the ladies continually talk about the violence, which is obviously a problem in men in general who put their hands on women and whatnot.
Mhm.
But when you actually, again, look at the data,
Yes.
um, the numbers are actually comparable between
Mhm.
men and women,
Mhm.
and women are actually oftentimes more of the initiators
Oh, yeah.
of the violence, and that the highest DV rates is in between different couples, between same-sex couples and heterosexual couples, is actually between a woman and a woman.
Yes.
But the narrative is that the most violent, now obviously we're stronger, but the group that's most likely to exhibit and express physical violence or property damage towards another party, it
Mhm.
appears to be women, but the narrative is men. What are your thoughts about that? Yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
No, Tommy Curry was the one that really blew me away with that, and that was a couple years before he even wrote the Man Not. Matter of fact, he sent me the Man Not in a Word document and asked me what I thought about it, and it blew me
Mhm.
out of my chair. But he was one of the first that I really saw, kind of break into that, where he was showing us that when it comes to intimate partner violence, most of the stats on bidirectionality, the men, hitting women, women hitting men was nigh equal. I had never heard that before because, again, I'm
Mhm.
sitting in these feminized environments where you could say that men just want to kill women in mass, and that would be received as truth, even by the professor. You
Yeah.
could say that. And I've heard professors say it, and it was accepted, and everybody just took notes. Well, so, when I'm actually starting to look at this data stemming from Tommy's research, he was the first that I saw point out bidirectionality was far more the norm. He was the first that I saw point out that in the 1980s, and this goes back to the Man Not as well, there were series of years where black men, were actually experiencing abuse at higher rates than black women.
In
And
the 80s.
in the 80s, I've never seen anyone talk about that across 3 universities and several degrees. Nobody had brought that up at all. So that, you mentioned that women will often initiate violence. They'll also be the ones to use not just weapons necessarily, but use other means to hit somebody with. Use I don't want to say devices, but
Frying pans.
frying pans, jars. The women were more apt to were more apt to do that. I didn't know that. It made
Mhm.
sense when I thought about it, but I never thought to research it. So
Mhm.
between that, bidirectionality, the rates of abuse and heterosexual and versus same-sex relationships, all of those things were swept under the rug. My son is going through this now. He's in his third year of college, and what he's taught in his classrooms, every semester he has a race gender class, and he tells me it's basically the same thing I've heard since high school. It's almost like they've taken the same playbook, and in every semester he's given the same list of things that he's approved to think about. When it comes to abuse, men are abusers, women are victims. That's it. It's just a straightforward narrative. There's no nuance, there's no analysis, there's not even any empiricism. These are things
Mhm.
you're allowed to think and say in class. If you raise question, it goes back to your experience in those classrooms in grad school. Right? But we've seen that. Yeah. So when it comes to intimate partner violence, there's all kinds of data around it, especially intimate partner homicide is similar.
Nah,
If
I
you
didn't look into that.
well,
Wow.
no, it's similar in the sense that if you just came out of the school courses I had,
Uh-huh.
you might hear people say, and this is something I heard on YouTube, I think 6-7 years ago, where they were saying a black man was killing a black woman every 5 minutes or something along
Yep.
those lines. Again, shout out to Tommy Curry. And there was another brother in the circle that kind of is a sociologist who gave me some info. We were having a conversation, the three of us, and one of the brothers said, "Look, as a sociologist, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than beaten by your spouse."
Correct.
And I was like, "That can't be." And but then we started to look at the data and found that to be true. And then after that, Tommy made mention of something that blew me away. He said,
Mhm.
in terms of intimate partner homicide, there's only a couple of hundred men and women that are killed each year. Now, that's not to suggest that anyone being killed should be dismissed or taken lightly.
Yeah,
Life
obviously.
is a life. It's regrettable anytime someone loses their lives. But the narratives that black men have been fed, going back to the 1980s, all those talk shows we've heard, those classes you've sat in, we heard that we were killing women in mass. And what you find out is out of 43 million odd black folk, you got about 2 to 300 on average every year, 200 men, 300 or so women that are killed in intimate partner homicide situations. Measure that against 43 million and tell me what percentage of men are killing women. And when you look at it from those lines, the numbers are actually far closer than they should be with the kind of rhetoric we've been hearing for decades about Black men. Right? So that's
Mm,
intimate partner homicide. I have a few blogs on that same blog site I gave you earlier where the Black male political agenda is located, where I list that data and the sources where you can go check that out yourself. But
mhm,
you're usually talking about a couple hundred people on each side of the gender line every
mhm,
year. But if you listen to popular media and most particularly the discussions happening in households, families, university classrooms when it comes to Black folk, Black men
mhm.
are monsters.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so
Wow.
it's ridiculous.
So I have one more topic that I wanted to ask you about politics, right?
Mhm.
And I think it was probably in my lifetime that I can recall. I've never seen the gender divide be as expressed as
Mm,
I saw in 2024 in terms of how much Black men and Black men specifically was being brought up in the discussion
mhm,
when to be fair, we're normally typically ignored.
mhm,
Men in general and especially Black men and politically, it's usually about what's the percentage of what white people are going to go and also Black women specifically, and then most of the other demographics they're not really too focused on, especially in regards to Black men. Um, how do you think? What did you notice, and how did gender play a significant role in the election and in our politics last year and bleeding into this year?
mm. Well, I think the push for Kamala within the Black community and within the Democratic Party was heavy. Black men, I think, took kind of a neutral stance in certain respects. I think um, even though voting Black men were the second highest numbers to support Kamala's presidency, which is something that Black women, in many respects, were started denying the moment Kamala Harris was picked as the front runner. We started to see Black women in high level positions already saying Black men are going to ruin it for us. Black
Mhm,
men. I mean, you remember when Obama came out and started talking about how Black men couldn't handle the idea of a woman president and Black men were inherently sexist. I don't know where he got this from, because if you check the last few elections, Black men had no problem voting for women,
mhm,
including Hillary Clinton. Black men
mhm,
are the most progressive group of men when you look at their voting patterns, and yet and still this stereotype was able to persist. So all the way up through last year, the idea was that Black men were going to ruin Kamala's presidential bid. I think what it did highlight, however, is not only are Black voting men extremely progressive, but there was a record number, in my humble opinion, of people that decided to opt out. Not necessarily that they decided to vote for Trump, because that
mhm,
became the leading line, right? It was Black men are going to either ruin this, and they're all going to vote for Trump. These are the kind of
mhm.
narratives we heard. The majority voted for Kamala, who voted. Many
Yep.
who didn't vote at all, and a small percentage who voted for Trump. And yet, nobody's paying attention to the ones that didn't vote, except for, I think, I won't say entirely, but I think the right paid more attention to men than the left had ever bothered to. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the ways they won that election. I mean, obviously, the primary way is white women. White women, pretty led that push for the right to get in office yet again. But
Mhm,
I think in terms of men, Trump was paying attention to men's discourses online more so than the left has ever bothered to. The left is still villainizing men and Black men in particular, and they're just starting to figure out that this is not working for them. Right? Trump took advantage of that, and as far as I'm concerned, he had every right to, because if those men weren't discarded in the first place, he wouldn't have been able to take advantage of the fact that they were sitting there unaddressed. Right.
100%.
So as far as that's concerned, I think in terms of gender, this idea of the woman president had to take a back seat to qualification, had to take a back seat to who people thought could handle the office. I ran into very few people that were confident about Kamala's ability to do so,
Mm,
and for that they were punished. They were dismissed as misogynists and sexist and so on and so forth, just on the basis of making those kinds of critiques. That in and of itself has got to change. The left is going to have to completely rebrand if they want to kind of get this together. But at the end of the day, this idea that Black men are inherently sexist, are inherently misogynist, are inherently toxic, That's no longer going to fly.
Nope.
And Black men are starting to retreat from participating in higher and higher numbers because they're not being heard and they're not being thought about. They're not being addressed. And that's one of the reasons I created the Black Male Political Agenda, because I wanted people to have talking points. If somebody puts a mic in your face, you know what I mean, and asks you what are your political interests, I want you to have a list that you can pull from. You may not agree with everything on the list, but I guarantee you as a man, you'll find something in there that you will agree with. And I want you to lead with that in these political discussions, because we've not really ever learned how to operate as a political demographic with our own set of interests. We watched women develop theirs. We watched Black women develop theirs. We never developed our own. And I think when you talk about Ice Cube and that interview he did with Cocktails with Queens or whatever it was,
Yep.
that was a pivotal moment. That was a pivotal moment for many Black men when they realized just how far this feminism has gotten to, how far this gynocentrism has gotten. I think many men were a little oblivious to how far it had gotten, but when those women defined themselves outside of the Black community, that was telling. Because the Ice Cube's agenda wasn't even necessarily male focused. He didn't deal with gender at all up to that point. He invited them to help write the gender component of his plan. He didn't have one. They assumed that it barred women, but he didn't address it at all. You know, so if you compare his to the Black Male Political Agenda, he wasn't dealing with gender, be it male or female focused.
Facts.
So that being said, that was a pivotal moment. I think that and Kevin Samuel's death were two of the most impactful moments. I call it Black masculinist turns. It's moments where men stepped back and said, wow. You know what I mean? Because when Kevin died, and you know this, you know, that you had women throwing parties, you had women celebrating, celebrities, everyday women celebrating that man's death. Even men that didn't agree with Kevin and took issue with Kevin were still taken aback at the glee that they saw at his death. That was a moment where Black men were like, there's something else going on here, you know, that goes beyond what we're talking about. And keep in mind, Kevin was actually trying to repair the Black community. He was trying to reinstate marriage. You know, contrary to the stereotypes, that was his fundamental goal. He was really trying to get marriage back on track in the Black community. So if you're going to celebrate his death and then turn around and tell Ice Cube that Black women are a separate demographic in and of itself, these kind of fissures are only expanding in that respect. And, you know, it's reached a fever pitch, in my humble opinion, with this Trump-Kamala election. And I think afterwards, we're seeing repercussions that we're going to see for the next decade that are going to impact the Black community in a large way, in a tremendous way, positive or negative. But it's a product of this kind of solipsism that we're seeing, where community no longer means what we thought it meant. The major Black masculinist turn is that Black men have been functioning like the Black community is still in 1970s, and Black women have functioned along the terms of what advances them as a group. It's only been in the last 5 years that Black men are realizing how much of a gulf there is between the two. Up until Kevin and COVID, you know, I think between those 2 points, I think many Black men were kind of we just kind of took it like, this is where things are. You know, we're still a community, we're still this and that. Those moments kind of shocked people into, especially Black men, into realizing this is very different than I thought it was.
Yeah. And I appreciate you highlighting both those key, like, recent watershed moments. And a lot of the guys that are still asleep, I don't think that they realize if what was it, like 87% or something high with Black men that voted for Kamala.
Somewhere, yeah, I think so.
Some high 80s or whatever.
Yeah.
And they got that much of the vote from Black men.
Yeah.
Y'all, for those who voted for her and those that showed, the reason why I decided to switch to party affiliations and become an independent last year, specifically, is because I knew what was on the other side, especially if she lost. It didn't matter if y'all had voted 99%.
It didn't matter.
You were still going to be blamed some way, somehow. There were, like you said, there were Black men that just didn't vote for either side, which means, well, they didn't give a vote to Trump. and they were still going to blame you. And that meant that even if we get almost 90% of the vote from that population,
Yeah.
if we lose, and if you did, even if you did vote or if you didn't vote for anyone, we were still going to blame you. And the reason is because we feel like we own you.
Yes.
We own you. And
Yes.
who are you to, if your black women are leading, what's his name? Roland Martin saying vote like a black woman. Follow and listen. Black women are ones that's always supposedly saving democracy. Listen to and be led by your women. And if she doesn't win, we're going to blame you anyway. And I realized all the misandry that was happening leading up to that point.
Yes.
With Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, all the different folks that had something to say about what's wrong with black men, and black men are this and black men are that. It wasn't that Trump had the most amazing strategy. His strategy was just the antithesis of what they were offering. Theirs was outright hate and attacking people and shaming people into voting for her. And he was like, well, we're going to just acknowledge you exist.
Exactly.
The Republicans and the conservatives, by and large, outside of Kentucky more recently than not, haven't really put a significant amount of proposals that actually for men. But but I was trying to explain to my friends that were Democrats and liberals, and I'm trying to explain, I'm raising the alarms, and they're like, now's not the time. Now's not the time. We got to be all in. And I'm like, I'm trying to let y'all know that the messages and what y'all been communicating, not recently, but in general, and who you're propping up, you're communicating, whether you realize it or not, that the future is female, and men are an unnecessary annoyance that we just need your votes for. We ain't gonna give you no specific policies. And we're not gonna really cater to y'all. And in fact that you're even acknowledging and saying that there's issues, what about, they always go back, what about women's needs? What about women's issues? And I'm like, y'all do realize that if one side's completely ignoring or demonizing men, and the other side just functionally just acknowledges their existence,
Exactly.
it's going to be an easy choice for all men that have high levels of testosterone. It wasn't a hard choice for a lot of men when they looked and saying, especially white men. So, well, I'm the enemy on this side. And this side, they at least acknowledge and they want to at least lie to me and pretend like they care about me. They at least gonna come on the podcast that I tend to watch and I'm interested in. And I'm realizing now in hindsight, and then right after the election, what's the one thing they did? Let's spend a few $1,000,000 to study and get some consultants to discuss our male agenda and what went wrong in terms of our messaging with men. And that again let me know all I need to know. It's no different when they spend the money on studies about reparations. It wasn't going to lead towards anything.
Not going anywhere.
It wasn't going to lead towards anything, man. So
not at all.
Last questions on my end. The role of the Black Boule and black men's votes, should they be up for grabs? Those two things. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, let me say the incredible thing about the voting pattern you laid out, especially for the last election, was that when you also add in that black men are the most disenfranchised voters, so a lot of people skip over that because of our relationship with incarceration and whatnot. Our access to voting is in question more than any other group, and yet you still have high numbers percentage wise of black male voters going in these particular directions. I personally think after this last election that you're going to see a severe drop. Unless the left can figure out how to rebrand, you're going to continue to see a continual drop, and especially as boomers start passing away.
Yep.
A continual drop in the black male presence, either when it comes to political participation in general or just among the left. It's going to be a shift. And people think the issue is that black men are moving right. Some are, but the bigger issue to me is those who just abstain from political participation altogether and don't want to have anything to do with the left. Those two things are going to be extremely damaging unless they can figure out how to communicate with men in a humane way. And there's nothing I've seen yet that suggests that they're even trying. And unfortunately, I think that's happening within the black community itself when it comes to, this gender divide you mentioned. I don't really see enough to suggest that, this gulf is being dealt with in good faith by many of the women I've been hearing from online. But that aside, you asked about
the Black
how do
Boule.
we frame it? What about the Black Boule? If their votes were up for grabs?
So Black Boule first, and for those who aren't aware, in the Black community, we talk about how there's individuals who are typically right under the politicians,
Mhm.
who are kind of the gatekeepers
Right.
for communicating, controlling, and dictating their audiences to think,
Mhm.
move, and support whatever agendas the Democratic establishment politicians above them want them to do.
Okay.
They'll use celebrities, they'll use
Right.
radio talk show hosts, they'll use influential athletes, they'll use anyone of influence as a means to shame, guilt, threaten, and keep you in line to stay on the intellectual political plantation that is the Democrat Party. So the idea of a Black person wanting to be independent, ask questions, no different than as a man questioning something that a woman's doing or what's happening. It's very similar territory where once you speak out, um, it's a matter of time before you start being called a coon and an Uncle Tom and stuff like that. So, what are your thoughts about the power of the Black Boule? And do you think that the Democratic establishment is starting to realize that
They're
perhaps they're
ineffective.
losing the Black Boule is losing their influence over younger Black men?
Yeah, I think they're being castrated. I think they're being castrated because they don't have the access that they promised in the Black community. And
Mm,
you raised men's rights up at the same time, and I think that's one of the principal, ideologies, philosophies, worldviews that's really neutering and kind of removing their power. The questions that are being asked are especially coming from men,
yep.
and in many ways, a lot of the Boule have been their view on men has been pretty consistent with how the Democrats, how the left is kind of we're toxic, we're a problem, so on and so forth. They've bought into that agenda. Their basic perception of Black men is that we are inherently wrong, we're inherently problematic, and we need to be corrected. We need to be corrected by acting and thinking and moving like women. That's been their particular philosophy. So as
Mm,
men begin to organize and pull together and raise questions, this in and of itself castrates that whole population in terms of the access that they promise the white elites that they have. They don't. And I think it's diminishing, and I think it's going to continue to unless there's some major intervention to suggest otherwise. But at this point, especially when you look at how Obama has been perceived in men's spaces,
hmm.
especially since November. I mean, we can go back to when his presidency, but when he stood up and said that Black men are the problem with this election and so on and so forth, he opened up a serious can of worms in that respect. But it just highlighted the left's perspective on men and Black men in particular. And
Mhm.
and due to that, I think there's kind of been a massive drop in appeal and impact, and the capacity for them to say that they have their finger on the pulse of what Black America and particularly Black men are thinking and willing to do. They've lost all credibility in that respect. I think
Yeah.
men's rights don't get credit for what it's done already. I
Mhm.
think it's kind of like a silent, I won't call it silent necessary, but as far as the mainstream is concerned, it's an unexpected tidal wave that is affecting everything, but nobody wants to name it out loud. And I think it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, and I've noticed it as well, which is why they're starting to become more vocal and lashing out more and more towards any man, especially any man wearing a red hat. Now, mind you, I'm playing a spin on the whole MAGA hat thing with the "Make Masculinity Great Again" hat, but they're functionally viewing and treating me the exact same way that
Right.
they would MAGA, and they don't even realize I'm an independent,
Right.
and I'm very nuanced with being able to point out issues and problems I've had with the right, Charlie Kirk, others like that I've learned that I it's the people who are pledged and addicted and subservient and loyal to a political party that can be
Mhm.
easily taken advantage of and manipulated. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to me, right? Where it's like what you're saying is they're losing power, they're losing leverage.
Hmm.
And what's crazy is the very reason they lost the election, they're still doing it right now,
Hmm.
and they don't even realize it's platforms like this,
Yeah.
it's spaces like this. Kamala Harris just said it in her book recently. She blamed the manosphere and people like I think she said Andrew Tate and Myron Gaines as a huge influential factor
Yes.
for why she felt like she lost the election. And I'm like, so wait a minute. When you avoid Joe Rogan, you go to all the softball interviews and you meet and do interviews with the people you paid
Hmm.
and overspent, by the way, on the
Hmm.
campaign budget, and you see that the reason you lost the election is because many of the men in the manosphere, people in the manosphere, were
Mhm.
speaking out about how much the Democrat and liberal establishment and the feminization of culture has antagonistically treated men in culture for years.
Mhm.
After the election, you double down
Yep.
and you will continue to avoid the very places and spaces. Almost still not seen almost any of them
Yeah.
sit down in any of these spaces and places and meet with. And guess what? If you think I haven't behind the scenes reached out and asked different people from all over the political spectrum,
Mhm.
independent, conservatives,
Yep.
Democrats and Republicans, who do you think was the one group that won't reply and is scared to come on?
Mm.
Same group.
Mm.
Same group, and I'm talking about a one person removed from mayors,
Yeah.
one person removed from city councilmen, and
Mm.
I've seen them in person. I've talked to them, let them know about the show, and they're doing the exact same thing and not realizing like I don't think that y'all going to realize like there's going to be a world like Gen Z's coming, and like you said,
Mhm.
when the older generation starts to die off,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you don't move undocumented immigrants in here pretty soon, you're going to lose a whole generation.
Oh yes.
And
Yeah.
and I said this recently, and I said it on Saturday with the guys, and I'll say it today to the black men specifically, and the liberal men in general. And it's not saying like, oh, you got to lean to the right or you got to get with Trump, because I have my problems and flaws with them as well. If every single demographic of men has started to shift away from the party that you're still supporting,
Mhm.
and the party that you're supporting, the number one demographic that's leading it and voting with the highest turnout is your women, and your community's the state of what it is.
Mm.
Have you ever thought about, as men, why is it that all the other men in the country are trending in the opposite direction and
Right.
we're following our women?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe, just a thought, maybe the other men see something you all still have yet to see, because you're not looking at it through the lens of men. You're looking at it through the lens of women in male bodies.
Mm. Mm.
So, so yeah, man, I appreciate it. And real quick, man,
Well,
so should black men's votes be up for grabs?
I do believe they should. I think we should take the posture that those who are willing to work for our vote should be the ones we should entertain giving them to, not those that we've committed to giving them to, regardless of whether or not they do anything for us. And I think many black men who have been pulling into the independent camp, because I'm there as well,
Yeah.
have been espousing that same kind of notion. If you want my votes, what are you willing to give them to? And that's one of the yet again one of the reasons I wanted to write that list. I wanted people to have a standard. If somebody's is willing to compete for your vote, I want you to have a ledger, a list of ideas that are the measure of whether or not you're going to support them. You know what I mean? So it isn't just a matter of you coming to me as a candidate and saying, well, here's the things I want to do for you to get your vote. No, here, these are the things I want. Talk to
Yep.
me. If you can't give me something on this list or something comparable, then no, you're not going to get my vote. That needs to be the approach we have. And I think more and more men have been moving that way. I just think it's been miscast as black men are voting right wing. That is happening. But I think what's
Mhm.
happening more so than that is black men are demanding some type of accountability for our votes. And that shift in culture has not been understood, not even by black women. Because I think black women categorize black men as just being right wing for the sake of being right wing. I don't think they understood black men were withdrawing, not because of a desire to necessarily be right wing, but because we haven't had a standard that suggests what a good candidate should do.
Mm.
Not just the fact that they want our votes and that they might pay attention to us, but what are they actually going to do? Black men have started to withdraw because of that. But there's a couple other things, real briefly, I wanted to say. So
Mhm.
my channel has about 41,000 subs. You're going to surpass me. You got momentum. I
Not
think
if
you're
we
doing a
keep doing
beautiful
these
work.
type of collabs.
No, you well, but the reason I bring that up
Mhm.
is I got this small channel, right? 41 odd thousand subs. By the third politician that reached out to me, and I promised I wouldn't say their names publicly,
Mhm.
their implications. I'll say this: one was a governor. I think two were senators. Right? They were on the right and the left. by the third politician, who was the governor, that reached out and wanted to talk to me about the agenda. That let me know how different politics function in this time period, right? Because
Mhm.
20 years ago, there's just no way that you were going to be able to have candidates call you just arbitrarily. But with 41,000 subs and a list that I posted on a WordPress site, I have politicians reaching out to me. What does that say about the difference in the political terrain? What does that say about the power that everyday people, particularly those who know how to use social media, for political purposes? What does that say in the shift in how these things function? That a
Mm.
small channel can get that kind of response. Those,
Mm.
and if that's happening with my small channel, what happens if you have, the 500,000 subs, the million subs? And we saw this again with Kevin. By the time he reached the million subs, you were hearing his opinions coming from spaces that you would have never connected to him as an individual. That
Yeah.
speaks to a dramatic shift in terms of technology, in terms of social media, and the impact it has on the larger society. So I say that to say, for those men that don't think they're being heard, that don't think their voices are going to be taken seriously, don't get it twisted. As small as you think this space is, even for somebody's channel that may be small, you have no idea who's watching them. You have no idea what influence they may be having. So keep pushing. Keep pushing to have your thoughts out there. Keep pushing to have the things you want to see happen, because you have way more power in this moment than we've ever had. The last
Wow.
thing I want to say is, you brought up Gen Z. We talked about, just real briefly, you mentioned how, or I think I mentioned earlier, politically, how much is going to change by the time you start to have more significant passings in terms of what is it, the boomers.
Yep.
There's going to be two things that we're going to notice dramatically, and it's going to seem like a dramatic shift, but it really is tied to how many boomers begin to pass and move on. You're going to
Mhm.
see a dramatic shift in voting practices in the Black community, particularly amongst men, and you're going to see a dramatic uptick in interracial relationships. The younger
Mm.
generations have a whole different philosophy. They're not raised with the same kind of race loyalty. I'm a child of a Panther.
Mhm.
I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s. There was a different kind of framework at play. This generation and the younger ones beyond that, it's not the same. It is
Nope.
a very different relationship. And they actually have reasons for what they're doing. It's not an arbitrary thing.
Mhm.
The thing I've noticed about them, Gen Z and younger, is if especially women are unwilling to hear what men have to say and deal with it in good faith, men are not gonna continue to argue. They're not going to continue to fight. I mean, that gender war online thing, there was a period of time where that took place. I think the younger generation are not doing that.
No, they're
They're
not.
making decisions and they're moving in silence, or as
Mm.
Obsidian used to say, they're voting with their feet, not only
Mm.
politically but socially. So there's not going to be a continual arguing and yelling back and forth, especially with the younger generation. As the boomers die off, young
Mhm.
ones are making moves. And if you're not willing to operate and deal with them in good faith, to acknowledge what they've been saying, and not just Gen Z, even some of us who are Gen X and whatnot, if you're not willing to hear what Black men are saying,
Mhm.
keep going. Keep
Wow.
going. It's already in motion. So yeah, voting practices are going to dramatically change.
Mhm.
We're already seeing an uptick in the number of interracial marriages. It's going to continue to go up, and with passport bros in play, it's changing the dynamic already. My argument is the Black community. People keep asking if it can be repaired, if it can be fixed. I'll say this: the Black community has already changed in fundamental ways that we just haven't seen yet. It's not necessarily as visible, but the face of the Black community has already changed, from interracial relationships within the boundaries of the US to international relationships. It's already changed. The Black community that we knew in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it will never look like that again. It
Mm.
already changed. So keep taking Black men lightly, keep dismissing what they're saying,
Yep.
keep on this particular route, and watch what happens.
Oh my God. Like, I appreciate so much of what you just highlighted. And the last key part you mentioned about the Gen Z and how they're moving totally different. They're not all this Mima and all this stuff. You got to listen, you got to be fearful. And I realize why that is. And this is beyond just Gen Z Black boys and men. This
Mhm.
is actually about Gen Z men and boys in general. They were born in an environment
Yeah.
where it was overt hatred for them from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yes.
They weren't used to an environment where they saw a noticeable change from
Mm.
2015, 2013, 2015, and after, and saying, man, ladies wasn't really this adversarial when I was in high school. They weren't this adversarial. Their entire existence is what we're describing right now is what they've grown up with as children.
Mm-hmm.
So they're used to not being able to get anything right in women's eyes. They're used to the default position is you're already guilty. You're the blame. You're always at fault. Women are always right. That's their whole experience. So
Mm-hmm.
once they make the decision, I'm tired of this, they're not fearful of women's displeasure and anger and hatred
No,
because that's been their whole life.
that's been their norm. Yeah.
That's been their default norm.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to be as beholden as millennials and Gen X and up because they didn't have those two dual realities. They only had the one. So it's like I already see now, like reimagine a teenage boy being like saying something that the girls in the class disagreed with and not liking. That would sound crazy to us.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, no, they're all embracing it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, now just realize, and warning this to Democrats, I'm warning this to the left, and this includes everybody in every westernized country that's playing with fire with what I'm about to say with this. Um, that can be channeled in one of two directions.
Mm.
And that's and for those who haven't seen Handmaid's Tale, I highly recommend it because when men don't have a voice and when men feel like they can't speak and when they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they can't be heard, all that's left is action.
Mm-hmm.
And if politically they're not going to be heard or represented, and the laws aren't going to be turned around, the only reason all this stuff is allowed to go and act to the degree that it does is because there's still an implicit understanding that men allow it.
Okay.
So when men get angry enough and they feel disenfranchised enough, and too many of them have decided this is a wrap, we're not doing this no more, 19th Amendment won't matter. What the law says is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
If too many men feel like society hates them, women despises them, there's no future for them, and the cost of everything is insane, they're going to start making really, really strange, not even strange, very logical, but unfortunately dangerous decisions, both for
Mm-hmm.
themselves, towards themselves, and potentially society.
Right.
So it will behoove you to start to recognize that you actually have to start to deliver, not just with the Black community and with men as well. You
Yeah.
actually have to start to care about boys and men and not the lip service you do to win elections. You actually have to start having policies to, like you said, women that are lying about accusations, there actually has to be a legitimate punishment.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to warn other people and warn other men
Mm-hmm.
about women that do this for a living. You have women that's accusing superstars, and you find out she's accused 5 other people. How did she get away with this? That's the stuff we're
Yeah.
saying. If you don't care about, and if every single time a man tries to explain what men are going through, what he as an individual boy or man is going through, you stun it, you shut it down. You talk about women's issues, you whataboutisms. You could keep doing all these tactics if you want to, and pretending that we're still in some functional patriarchy that nobody else is apparently able to take advantage of but women.
Mm-hmm.
Keep playing around with it. Keep
Exactly.
ignoring them during election cycles, and don't be surprised at what the consequence is going to be. Because if the far right takes hold, if you think what's happening now is the far right, no, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what it can be.
Yeah.
So it would behoove you all to recognize and listen to people like Dr. Hasan and Dr. Tommy Curry and so many others that speaking in this space and knowing there are people in this space that don't have the intellectual good faith perspectives that we do to speak on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's strictly through the lens of women ain't shit, hate them
Yeah.
all, they're all bad, they're all toxic, X, Y, and Z. Just realize the angry young adolescents and young men that's full of testosterone is being pumped this stuff and they're experiencing it. What do you think is going to be the potential?
Well,
Come on.
yeah, there's another side to that. Now, first of all, I've had 13-year-olds listening to my channel since 7 years ago. So these are young men who have grown into manhood, and there are young men that still listen now. Don't know how it happened. Didn't anticipate it, but these young men are paying attention. So they're able to get the direct impact from older men that many of us in my generation weren't able to get if you didn't have an older man right there in the house with you. So they're getting that. But the thing I'm noticing in terms of how they're viewing relationships, how they're viewing women, they're actually experiencing something that I've been hearing from 13-year-olds all the way to 65-year-old men. When they encounter women that do not have a fundamental disdain for their existence, women that do not have a particular misandry targeted at them, when they're coming into contact with other communities, let alone internationally speaking, because the reality that nobody wants to say out loud is that Black men are sought after the world round. Black men in particular in the West are sought after.
White men and black men. Yep.
It's a very different reality. Black men and women have a different reality in terms of how we experience the international experience in general. Other groups of men, yeah, they'll have sex with women, but marrying them, having kids, it's a whole different dynamic. But for men, that's not the experience. Women around the world do seek out Black men. And so as Black men, and this is where the 13 and 65-year-old come in, report to me about being treated well. Comedian Patrice O'Neal had a bit where he talked about the word okay. And he was making jokes about Black men who go to college and they date a white girl. And she says, okay, you want a sandwich? Okay. And she'll go make it. So on and so. He was joking, but he wasn't, because what he was referring to is something that I think is happening on a wider scale. Men are experiencing women from around the world that do not have a deep-seated contempt for them from birth.
Totally different experience.
And many of these Black men, especially if they've never experienced it before. I mean, I've met men in their mid-60s who they've had 3 marriages, they've had kids, they have never been treated well until they've dated internationally or interculturally or interracially, and they're being treated in terms of who they are and not simply as this negative Black male stereotype. And they are falling in love with being treated humanely. And the reality is, it doesn't actually take much, man. I've had brothers call me like, this woman cooked me dinner. I had a brother sit down to me. He lives real close to me. He told me he had his first date with a wife he's been married to now for 15 years. His first date with her, he was living with his parents, didn't have a car, didn't have a job. She was willing to go on a date with her. The date was Netflix and chill. She brought over a full home cooked meal and I think it was like a pineapple cake, to a man that was, and he told me, was dismissed by Black women on a routine basis simply because of what he didn't have.
Yeah.
This is not, I think she's Latina, but the point is, she saw value in him that nobody else saw. 15 years later, they're married with kids, doing well. Point is, if these men are experiencing things differently, if there's not a willingness to deal with these men as human beings on the merit of who they are, others will and are.
Yeah.
It's changing the dynamic entirely.
Yeah. And this is the thing that I've been trying out, like, the building's on fire. I am screaming to Black women and saying, Obsidian just said this last week. In the next 20 years, the concept of the Black community in America is going to be nothing as a concept, as a distinct people group. And he's saying that exactly what you're saying, ladies, that if you don't wake up in real time and realize the white female supremacists that are led by Marxist ideology that's anti everything, that's needed for you to function culturally with your people, with your community, they functionally move and act like white supremacists, and those are your allies. And if you keep aligning yourself with them and using their talking points and having this adversarial relationship with all Black men that don't just agree with you on every single talking point, men aren't. The scariest thing, ladies, is going to be 5 to 10 years from now, when most men that look like you, if only the ones that are married will be nice to you, and all the others will be looking elsewhere. So you have to, like, and I'm saying is why, and it's like the building's on fire. I'm screaming it's on fire, and you got women inside the building talking about, I don't like your tone. Why are you yelling?
Right.
Because I don't think I just literally said this not too long ago when I was surrounded by 5 ladies at a panel in-person discussion down in Miami, Black women. And the question by AJ Rants Reacts, he asked the question and they didn't get what he was hinting at. He asked them, ladies, do you feel like you're in competition with the women around you, like other women? And each one of them said no.
Mm.
And I'm like, you can't be last at every relational demographic question in terms of marriages, first in divorce rates, highest rates of single parents households, demonizing the men that date out, demonizing the men that vote differently than you, trying to shame, guilt trip, and control the men that try to speak out or challenge you with anything. Y'all got to realize if you don't get the warning now, there's going to be an era where your views and opinions truly will be irrelevant. And the scariest part is not that men will keep arguing. If you're worried about a gender war, imagine when there is no war because the men stop showing up to the battlefield.
Yeah.
That's the warning. But we about to say, Doc?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But one of the things I was going to say was that traditionally, even early on with passport bros, before they became passport bros, as with most brothers, they always gave Black women the right of first refusal. Black women always got the right of first refusal. I think with younger generations, that's going to become less so. But I think even earlier on, when passport bros really began to grow, one of the things that I saw was women would dismiss them as just wanting white women. But what I found was these brothers were coming back with women from Africa, from North America, from the Caribbean. Sometimes they were darker than the sisters that they dated here. And I was like, so many people are really not understanding what's going on here. This isn't about aesthetics. It isn't about, chasing white women. It really is men who are looking to build families often, or at least have experiences with the feminine that are not rooted in misandry and contempt. Yeah. And it's just reached a fever pitch, I think, where the gate is open and brothers are really looking for whomever is, as long as they're attracted to them, but who's ever willing to reciprocate and engage them in good faith. And I just think at this point, I have not seen the willingness to deal with the reality of that. I just haven't. So that said, we'll see where it goes. But I think where this is where it even in terms of the statistics as far as interracial marriage, I'm like, this is the writing is pretty clear. Y'all need to either do something about it or not. And and so for this last period since Trump has been in office, what we've seen, particularly with the job losses and so on and so forth, is either one of two responses. I've seen a doubling down of the contempt for Black men by certain Black women. And I've seen those who are saying, okay, I'm ready to be a wife. I don't want to work anymore. Come get me. And I'm like, neither one of those responses are going to generate the response you think you want. It's not. It's not. It's not. These men are experiencing treatment they've never had before. And in order to compete with that, you have to be, if nothing else, authentic and operating in good faith. And I don't know. So that said, man, I really appreciate being invited, man. I enjoy your show. I enjoy your work. I'm looking to see where you go with it. So you got a fan over here. So anything you need from me, let me know. Yeah.
Doc, this has been incredible. I appreciate all the work you've been putting in, and I'm happy that you guys are carrying the mantle of masculinity, especially in our community when it wasn't fair, especially when it wasn't favorable to do so. You took the bullets, you took the arrows earlier on and risked a lot of things when you spoke on this stuff. And finally, we're starting to see the fruit on a more mainstream level potentially. So I'm honored and appreciative that you blessed the platform and my audience for sure. Why don't you tell everybody where they could find you, how they could support you going forward?
I'm on YouTube. It's the Onyx Report. Just look up my name, Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. Come through. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel or Patreon. I do film reviews every 1st and 15th where we chop it up. We do a Black Masculinist review of a variety of films. So you can come into Patreon, join that discussion. We do those live, so you can engage that. I have a book out, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry. You can check out. You can find that on Amazon or anywhere else you buy books, and go from there. Obviously, check out the blog. It's free, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. See what we're producing there, see what we're talking about, familiarize yourself with the Black male political agenda. And I would just say from there, look out for your boy.
Wow,
So,
listen, I
yeah,
appreciate you, sir. I know this won't be our last time connecting, and you listen. You know, I definitely owe you now. So
you go.
yes, I appreciate you for sure. So I'm gonna let the good doc go and go through a couple more of these comments. So, sir, have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
All right, y'all. So that was incredible. I almost want to break down because y'all got to know, man. When I just got done my men's self improvement group right before we did this live, and I said that this has been the most probably rewarding professional moment for me. Um, Not just this interview, but just how this podcast has taken off. And it's also probably been the most isolating because as a man, and you try to stand up in a culture that's extremely feminized, where most of the men around you are cowards and are fearful of the women's opinions and views around them, even when they're not true or accurate. And most men are scared to lose jobs and stand up for what's true and right. Um, it's been the most rewarding. And at the same time, 98% of the people who are supporting this platform, supporting this channel, supporting this cause are people that I didn't know. Nearly everybody in my life, is on the other end, and the Kamala Knights and the Obama Knights and the people who, we're kind of talking about, So it was very cathartic to have somebody that's smart, that's wise, that's a professional, that's well researched and respected, be able to not only join the platform, but remind me that I'm not crazy, that I'm not delusional. And it's okay right now if me and a lot of the guys and people in this space right now are just early. It's okay that we're early. And it's okay that a lot of people are hard headed and so led by their emotions still in this season, and they gotta wait till it becomes a real trend to be able to accept and recognize, oh well, maybe we have been a little too hard on men, or maybe we do disrespect black men, or maybe we have been hard on our boys. People will Some people will get there, some people never will. And it's been tough from the moment I started it, knowing that most people in my life that kind of lean too far to the left and kind of worship the Democrat Party and the left and anything that happens on that side, and the level of groupthink where they can't be individually objective with their perspectives. Um, it's been a tough year, and I appreciate everybody who's been willing to show love and support. Genuinely. I know I'm early. I know that many of us, and they've been way earlier than I have, like Dr. Curry and Dr. Hasan and others. Um, yeah, and they had to take the arrows, and I guess this is my time to take the arrows as well. And I hope that in the end, when I'm done doing this work, that things will be better, that things will improve, and men and women will get along better, or they'll at least be smart enough to align with men and women that um, see the concerns of an overly feminized culture and work environment. So listen, y'all, I hope that it was helpful. Shout out to everybody who gave the super chats. This was by far the most super chats I've ever seen for this channel so far. And I'm like, this is incredible, man. The love. If you haven't given, I appreciate y'all just for the likes. So if you haven't liked this video, make sure that you do. If you want to show support and you don't want to give to the super chat, feel free to become a member of the channel, which is only $2.99, $2.99, not $200, just to be able to support the channel and the cause. But when I tell y'all, man, having somebody that's that well respected, um, see your voice is valuable, see your channel is meaningful, and the idea that I've had for 5 years, finally presenting it to the public. And yeah, a lot of people in my actual life don't care, aren't don't care, aren't interested in it, fearful of showing support for it, don't want to show support in it. This interview kind of makes all that kind of feel irrelevant now. I think I don't want to be pompous or weird, but I feel like this kind of feels like a stamp of approval in this space now. And it definitely happened with people like Dave Anderson and Obsidian and a few others, and Dr. Will and others, of course, especially in the whole manosphere, masculinity discussion type talk and space. But it was cool. I just had a conversation with my wife, and I said, it was tough to realize that almost everybody in your life and world can see something really big and powerful is growing and happening, and they can't be happy for you and don't support you. Unfortunately, that's not the first time I've experienced that, so it's not nearly as crushing of a blow. Um, but this feels great. This feels good, and I hope that men and women were able to watch this and learn and see that we've done a lot of damage to women in the past, as not at maybe us as individuals, but definitely in terms of as a society and culture. And a lot of hurt young girls um, became vengeful and angry women, and a lot of hurt young men are opting out of marriage and leaving the country and opting out of relationships altogether. And if we don't in real time recognize that a lot of things have been put in place to make sure that we were at odds with each other and hate each other, and if we don't learn from the mistakes and step outside of our emotions and realize much of this politics situation it's a lot of just games and using people to get their votes and extract resources from the community. And in the end, we end up lonelier and hating each other all the more. So, I know this message won't hit everybody that probably needs to hear it, but there's a couple of things I want to ask everybody that's watching this channel right now. Obviously, definitely subscribe if you haven't. Um, every single Democrat politician that you can name, from Jasmine Crockett to Obama to the mayor in Chicago, you name it. Every single person that you know, I want you to tell them they need to interview Ask a Brother with me. I think you need to tell them that if they want to have a political future over the next 10 years, they need to start embracing the space. They need to stop avoiding men. They need to do sit downs with Dr. T. Hasan. They need to do interviews with people who aren't going to give them softball interviews. I'm not going to throw people under the bus or anything crazy like that, but if you want to even pretend to act like you care about men and black men specifically, you actually have to listen, and you can't wait until election cycles to come to barbershops and a couple churches and think that that's sufficient. The days of that is over, and the younger black men that's even younger than me, under 30 and under 25, um, they're not even looking y'all way. So I have much more to say about that for sure, but I'm gonna save it for a future podcast for sure. So I appreciate everybody that's donated, everybody that's shown love. This was from an academic standpoint, from a intellectual exercise standpoint, this was good. And I'll probably cry after the camera comes off, but just know, like, for those people who love to learn and love to grow and love to have these type of conversations, you can't imagine a world where you can't have these conversations with almost anybody in your life. And then you can have a 2-hour conversation with somebody who gets it, who's written on it, and has highly respected in the field. It's I don't even know if I can really explain it well. So I'm honored that he came on. I'm honored that you all tuned in. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Jeff St. James. Yes, that's my real name, not my stage name. And it's Ask a Brother. Ask a Brother is just about people being able to think, be allowed to feel, be allowed to grow and just be. So the days of thinking that we're not allowed to ask questions anymore, we're not allowed to vote differently, think differently, be different. Um, this is a space where, unfortunately, on the side that I've been loyal to the most, diversity of thought isn't allowed. At least here in this space on this channel, it is welcome. So yeah, conservatives, liberals, Democrats, Republicans, independents, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, gay, trans, straight, you name it. This is a space where I think uh, lively conversations that can kind of be a little bit higher minded. And you know, I hope that this channel is turning into that vision and that you all are starting to experience it. So listen, y'all, I know I have an interview tomorrow lined up. I have one lined up on Thursday as well. So I'm super excited, man. And I hope and I pray, and I haven't even seen all the comments. So I'm definitely gonna try to skim through them after I close out this chat and get some food in me. But I'm honored. Um, I'm not trying to be Kevin Samuels. I'm not trying to be anybody else other than me and make my own lane. But that's the thing that I ask for everybody, that you like this, of course, like this channel, of course, and like this particular video, but more so that you send it to everybody you know. Tag, comment, send it to every single person you know, and every single celebrity, and every single politician that needs to hear it. This is the one thing that I ask. Tag them, comment, send it to their DMs, comment in their chats, flood their stuff. If you want to see things change between men and women, we have to get these people to come to the table and make it to where they can't ignore it anymore. And it doesn't just have to be me. It can obviously be people in the manosphere space, the red pill space for sure. And the days of being able to ignore men and ignore these spaces and be able to demonize these spaces without knowing anything about it and only listening to the men that just pander to what women and Democrats want to hear, those days are functionally over. So yeah, I think that we're at a point in time where this is a movement. And no, I don't have to become, you know, Nick, what's his name? Nick Fuentes and whatnot. But what I'm realizing and observing is if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I'm standing on making masculinity become great again in the US, in the Black community. I want men to grow. I want men to thrive. I want men to be better, and I want men to lead again. Not through a dictatorial, authoritarian approach. Maybe we can learn from the men of the past that's abused that. But it's very, very clear that a matriarchy isn't going to work, and it's very, very clear that abusive men that take advantage of women is not going to be the leaders in my worldview. This is a quest for us to become better versions of ourselves, learn from our mistakes, go where you're loved and appreciated, and become more politically astute and aware. As you saw, he mentioned that he's an independent, as am I. I highly suggest that you guys start to read, to research, to learn, and do life with people who are attempting to do the same thing. And I'm honored. So listen, y'all, make sure that y'all check out the Black Male Agenda. Go to his website for sure. Check out Ice Cube's agenda as well. And as men, regardless of race or creed, in real time, our country and our society and culture has kind of been co-opted and captured, and it's time for us to take it back. So you know the revolution is going to be because of us. There was a war going on, and we had no idea that we were in an actual battle. And what's been compromised and taken over. Our families are in shambles. Our communities are a mess. Men and women are at odds, and we're the current men of the generation. So, you know, this is a wake up call to both men and women, both in and outside of various communities. And it's time to leave the red and blue plantations. And it's really time for us to actually fight and realize that the battle is not actually against each other. The battle is against those up there, those at the top of the pecking order. And, you know, they've been dividing us on cultural issues for quite some time. And it's time for us to sever ties with those that are completely brainwashed and want to be beholden to whatever it is those at the top want to manipulate them to. And we got to focus on those that want to build and grow. So I hope that this was helpful. Make sure y'all tune in tomorrow at night and Thursday night, as well as I meet with my next two ladies for follow-up interviews. And you know, once you check and see who's coming in on Thursday, I know y'all gonna be hype and surprised with that for sure. So that's all that I ask. Make sure that you like it, make sure that you share it, and definitely pick one or two celebrities or one or two politicians, regardless of political affiliation, but especially on the left, and send them this video and let them know I'm ready I want to meet with them and I want to interview them. I hope that this was helpful, y'all. Have a good evening. Shout out to everybody and shout out to every single person that gave, every single person that supported, every single person that tuned in. I'm honored. I'm pleased. I hope that this was helpful, meaningful, in the beginning stage of planting seeds of truth that will allow you to allow those seeds to grow and expand your mind. So have a good evening, y'all. Shout out to y'all. Love everybody and love the support. And listen, let's keep it growing. Let's keep building and stay tuned because I got many, many, many more surprises to come. Have a good night and talk to y'all soon. Peace and Hasan out.